Hi, I'm glad to see you on my channel. Today I'll tell interesting stories from Greek mythology. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe.
Close your eyes for a moment and let the world around you grow quiet. Because tonight we are going to travel somewhere very far away, but backward through time itself, to a place so ancient that even the gods were not yet born, to a moment so primordial that there was nothing, and then, slowly, there was everything. This is the story of Cronus, and it is one of the oldest stories ever told by human lips. But before we can speak of Cronus, we must first understand the world he entered, because unlike the stories of heroes and mortals, the story of Cronus begins not with a birth, not with a battle, not with a prophecy whispered in the dark. It begins with an idea. A vast, terrifying, breathtaking idea. What if the universe itself had parents? Settle into wherever you are comfortable. Let your muscles relax. Let your thoughts slow. Because what I'm about to tell you comes from thousands of years ago, from the sun-drenched hillsides of ancient Greece, where men and women sat beneath olive trees and looked up at the same stars you see tonight and asked themselves, where did all of this come from? Who made the mountains? Who breathed the first breath of wind across the sea? And who, or what, was there before any of it? The ancient Greeks, unlike many cultures of their time, did not believe the world was created from nothing by a single almighty hand. They believed it was born. They believed the cosmos was a living thing, a creature that grew and changed and struggled and suffered just as any mortal creature does. And at the very heart of that belief was a word: chaos. Not chaos as we understand it today, not disorder, not confusion, not the sensation of losing your keys before an important meeting. When the ancient Greeks said chaos, they meant something far more profound and far more peaceful in its own strange way. Chaos, in the oldest Greek tradition recorded by the poet Hesiod in his magnificent work called the Theogony, written around the 8th century before the Common Era, was simply the void, the yawning gap, the primordial emptiness from which all things emerged. It was not violent. It was not angry. It was simply open, like a breath held before a word is spoken, like the silence before a piece of music begins. Hesiod tells us that at first there was chaos, and then from chaos there arose two things. The first was Gaia, the earth herself, the deep-breasted one, the foundation of everything, the ground beneath your feet made divine. And the second was Eros, not love as we experience it between people, but the primordial force of attraction that draws things together, the cosmic glue that makes matter cling to matter, that makes stars form from clouds of dust, that makes rivers find their way to the sea. And then chaos produced two more children from within itself, Erebus, who was the darkness of the underworld, and Nyx, who was the night. And when you lie here tonight in your darkness, in your Nyx, you are resting in something the Greeks considered ancient beyond measure, the child of chaos itself, a goddess so old and so powerful that even Zeus, the king of all the gods, was said to fear her. From Nyx and Erebus came Ether, the upper air, the bright shining atmosphere where the gods lived above the clouds, and Hemera, the day. And so even before a single god we recognize had been born, the cosmos was already assembling itself piece by piece, the way a great cathedral is built, one stone upon another, each one necessary, each one placed with precision. But it was Gaia, the earth, who would set everything else in motion, because Gaia the great mother of all, looked around at herself and found that she was alone. And from that aloneness, from the depths of her own body, she brought forth children. She gave birth without any partner to Uranus, the starry sky that arches above us, and to Rhea, the mountains, and to Pontus, the deep sea. And when she looked at Uranus, her own son, she saw something in him that she needed. He was vast and encompassing. He covered her completely, spreading himself over her like a warm blanket from horizon to horizon. And in that union of sky and earth, a new generation was prepared. This is the generation that matters to us tonight. This is where our story truly begins. Because from the union of Gaia and Uranus, from earth and sky together, there came 12 extraordinary beings, 6 daughters and 6 sons. Beings of inconceivable power and size, older than any god we know, older than the Olympians, older than anything the Greeks would later build their temples to. These beings were called the Titans. Their names ring like ancient bells when you say them aloud. Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world. Coeus, the pillar of the north and the god of intelligence. Creus, the pillar of the south. Hyperion, the pillar of the east and lord of heavenly light. Iapetus, the pillar of the west, ancestor of humankind. Themis, goddess of divine law. Mnemosyne, goddess of memory. Tethys, goddess of the sea's fresh water. Phoebe, goddess of the moon's brightness. And Rhea, the great mother, the flowing one, the goddess of the mountain wilds. And then there were the 2 youngest, Thea, goddess of sight and the blue of the sky, and Cronus, the youngest son, the last to be born, the one about whom everything else in this story revolves. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment what it would feel like to be Cronus in those earliest days of the world. You are a being of extraordinary power. You are enormous, not in the silly way of cartoon giants, but in the way of something genuinely cosmic, something whose footstep shakes mountains, whose breath is the winter wind. Your brothers and sisters are the pillars of the world, the foundations of the sky, the sources of all rivers and seas. Your father is the sky itself. Your mother is the earth beneath your feet. And yet, despite all of this magnificence, something is wrong. Something has been wrong since before you can remember. Your father, Uranus, the sky, does not love you. This is the detail that separates the story of Cronus from a simple tale of power and ambition. It begins with something achingly, heartbreakingly human. A child whose father will not accept him. A child who is pushed away, hidden, refused the light he deserves. Because Uranus, for all that he was the vast and encompassing sky, was also afraid. And fear, as any student of history will tell you, makes monsters of even the most powerful beings. Gaia had not given birth only to the Titans. She had also, in her laboring, produced 3 other sets of children. First came the Cyclopes, 3 enormous beings named Brontes, Sterapis, and Argus, whose names mean thunder, lightning, and bright. They had a single eye each in the middle of their foreheads, and they were master craftsmen, the smiths of the divine world, who would one day forge the thunderbolts of Zeus. And then Gaia gave birth to 3 more children, the strangest and most terrible of all her offspring, the Hecatoncheires, whose name means the 100-handed, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each with 50 heads and 100 arms, beings of such monstrous size and power that the very mountains trembled when they stirred. And Uranus looked upon these children, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, and he was horrified. Not because they were wicked, not because they had done anything wrong, but because they were different, because they were strange, because they were powerful in ways he did not understand and could not control. And so Uranus did what frightened rulers have done throughout all of history, both divine and human. He imprisoned them. Hesiod tells us that Uranus thrust the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires back into the earth, into the deep places beneath Gaia's skin, into Tartarus, the deepest pit of all, the abyss beneath the underworld itself, a place so far down that an anvil dropped from heaven would fall 9 days and nights before it reached the earth, and another 9 days from earth before it reached the floor of Tartarus. There they were kept, bound in chains, their tremendous strength wasted in darkness, their 50 heads and 100 hands useless in the deep, and Gaia felt it. She felt every moment of her children's imprisonment because they were inside her. They were part of her body. Their suffering was her suffering. The Greeks understood this intimately. They saw Gaia not as a symbol or a metaphor, but as a living being of flesh and stone and soil, and the torment of her children was a physical wound she carried every moment of every age. So Gaia made a decision. It was a decision born of pain, born of the deepest maternal love, twisted by desperation into something that would reshape the universe forever. She decided to act. Now, some scholars of ancient religion and mythology, particularly those who have studied Hesiod's theogony in its original Greek, have pointed out something fascinating about this moment in the text. Gaia does not act impulsively. She does not lash out in blind rage. She thinks. She plans. She reaches into the depths of the gray flint that lies within her body, and from it she fashions a weapon, a sickle. A great adamantine sickle with a serrated edge, a weapon designed not for war in the open field, but for intimate violence, for the kind of blow that can only be struck by someone standing very close. And then Gaia gathered her Titan children together, the 12 of them, and she spoke to them. She laid before them the injustice that their father had committed. She showed them the wound she carried, and she asked for a volunteer. She asked which of her children would be willing to do what needed to be done. 11 of the 12 Titans said nothing. They looked away. They shifted their enormous feet. Some of them, according to later traditions, were simply afraid of their father. Uranus was the sky itself. To strike the sky is no small thing. Others perhaps felt some loyalty, some hesitation born of filial feeling. For all the complexity and divinity of their nature, the Titans in this moment are startlingly human in their reluctance. But Cronus said yes. Cronus, the youngest, the last-born, the one who had perhaps felt his father's rejection most acutely. He stepped forward. He took the sickle from his mother's hand, and Hesiod tells us that Gaia was glad, not relieved, glad. There is a distinction there that is worth sitting with for a moment as you rest. She was glad, not merely that someone had agreed to help her, but specifically that Cronus had agreed. The youngest son, the one who was not afraid. What followed is one of the most dramatic events in all of Greek mythology, and it is also, if you look at it through the lens of the historians and anthropologists who have studied these myths for centuries, one of the most symbolically rich moments in all of human storytelling. Because what Cronus did to Uranus was not simply an act of violence, it was a cosmic revolution. It was the first time in the history of the world that power had been challenged and overthrown. The Greeks described it with poetic exactness. Uranus came at night, as he always did, to lie with Gaia, and to spread himself over the world as darkness. And as he descended, as the sky came close to the earth in that primordial intimacy, Cronus was waiting, hidden, the sickle in his hand, And with one great stroke, Cronus castrated his father. This is the moment that echoes through all of subsequent Greek myth. The blood of Uranus fell upon the earth, upon Gaia herself, and from it sprang new life. From the drops that fell on the soil grew the Erinyes, the Furies, those relentless goddesses of vengeance who pursued wrongdoers to the ends of the earth. From the drops that fell on the sea grew the foam from which Aphrodite herself would one day emerge. And from the weapon and the wound together came a group of spirits known as the Meliae, the ash tree nymphs who would one day be the companions of mortal heroes. Uranus, wounded and unmanned, retreated upward. He rose back into the sky, and as he went, as he was driven away from the earth that had been his domain, he spoke. He cursed his son. And this is the curse that would define everything that came after. Every choice Cronus made, every act of terror and desperation that gives our story its title. Uranus looked down at Cronus with eyes full of pain and fury, and he said, "Your own children will do to you exactly what you have done to me." Let that sink in for a moment. As you breathe slowly in the quiet of this night, consider what that prophecy means, not just as a supernatural prediction, but as a human truth. Because what Uranus was really saying, and what thousands of years of readers and listeners have understood in their bones, is that the patterns of power repeat. The son who overthrows the father will in turn be overthrown by his own son. Violence begets violence. Revolution consumes its own children. The wheel turns. Cronus heard that curse. And unlike his father, who had tried to solve the problem of threatening children by burying them in the earth, Cronus would try a different solution. More dramatic, more personal, more horrifying. But that comes later. First, there was a golden age. After the wounding of Uranus, after the sky god retreated to his permanent exile above, Cronus ascended to rulership of the cosmos. He freed the Titans, his brothers and sisters, from whatever constraints Uranus had placed upon them, and together they took control of the world. This became known as the Titanomachy's predecessor, the Age of Titan rule, and in many ancient traditions, it was remembered as something extraordinary, something good. We call it the Golden Age. Hesiod, again our faithful guide through these ancient times, tells us in his other great work, The Works and Days, that the first race of humans who lived during the reign of Cronus were like gods themselves. They lived without sorrow, without toil, without disease. The earth gave them its fruit willingly. There were no wars, there were no laws, but there was no need for laws because no one did wrong. Men and women lived and grew old as gently as falling into sleep, and when they died, for they were not immortal, they passed away in peace, as if overcome by a gentle drowsiness, and their spirits remained afterward as guardian spirits, benevolent watchers over the living world. Now it is worth pausing here, as we rest in this quiet darkness together, to consider what this memory of a golden age means. Historians and anthropologists have long noted that virtually every ancient culture on Earth has some version of this memory, some story of a better time, a first time, a time of plenty and innocence that existed before the complications of the present. Some scholars believe it is a folk memory of early hunter-gatherer societies, which in some respects were more egalitarian and less violent than the agricultural civilizations that replaced them. Others see it as a psychological archetype, the human longing for a simpler existence, the persistent dream of Eden. Others still see it as a political tool, a story told to make the current suffering seem like a fall from grace, something that must be endured until the wheel turns again. But for the ancient Greeks who told this story around their fires and in their temples, it was simply history, real history. The reign of Cronus was a good reign. He was a powerful ruler, perhaps even a just one, by the standards of the divine world. He sat upon his golden throne at the center of the cosmos, his wife Rhea beside him. Rhea, the great flowing goddess, his own sister, as was the custom among the Titans, among whom family relationships followed none of the rules that would later govern human society. And for a time, it was enough. But the curse was always there. Like a thread of shadow woven through a tapestry of gold, it could not be removed. Uranus had spoken, and in the world of Greek myth, when a god speaks a prophecy, it is not a maybe. It is not a possibility. It is a certainty dressed in the language of the future. The only question is not whether it will happen, but how, and when, and through whose hands. Cronus knew this. He felt it every time he looked at the sky, every time he heard the wind move through the trees. He felt it in the way a scar aches before rain, persistent, nagging, undeniable. And when Rhea first told him she was with child, instead of joy, Cronus felt the first cold fingers of that ancient dread close around his heart. What do you do when you are a god, when you are the ruler of the world, when you have defeated your own father and taken his place, and you know with absolute certainty that what you did will be done to you? What do you do when the thing you fear is not an enemy you can see and defeat, not a rival you can outmaneuver, but your own child, your own blood, your own love? Cronus made a choice, and it was a terrible one. He swallowed his children, one by one, as Rhea brought them into the world, as each Titan baby drew its first breath in the light of the new world that Cronus himself had made. He took them from her and swallowed them whole. He consumed them. He kept them inside himself, as Uranus had kept the Hecatoncheires inside Gaia. He became his father's mirror. He became the very thing he had destroyed. But that part of our story, the swallowing, the hiding, the desperate attempt to hold back the tide of fate, that is for the chapters still to come. And those chapters will be told slowly, carefully, with all the patience that a story this old deserves. Because this is not a story that should be rushed. It is a story that should settle over you like the night itself, slowly, softly, darkening at the edges until the stars come out one by one. For now, let us rest here, in this moment just before Rhea's first pregnancy, in this last moment of the Golden Age when everything was still possible, when the curse was still only words spoken in pain by a defeated god, when Cronus sat on his throne and the world lay peaceful and abundant around him, and the only sound was the breath of the sleeping earth beneath him. This is where the story begins, and it is a very long story. One that will take us through the depths of a father's fear, through the darkness inside a god's body, through the cunning of a young goddess and the wisdom of an ancient grandmother, to the longest war in the history of the divine world, and at last, to the strange and bittersweet resting place at the end of things. But for now, let the world of ancient Greece settle over you. Let the warmth of it, the smell of thyme and salt air, the distant sound of the Aegean, the soft light of a Mediterranean moon, wrap itself around you. You are lying in the grass of the earliest world. The sky above you is Uranus, ancient and vast. The earth beneath you is Gaia, warm and slow breathing as she sleeps, and somewhere in the golden distance, on a throne you cannot quite see, a powerful, lonely, frightened god sits in the silence of his own making, waiting for the future he cannot stop. Because this is where Cronus becomes something more than a victor. This is where he becomes something more complicated, more tragic, more human than any simple tale of a god seizing power could ever be. This is where the Father begins. Take a slow breath in and let it out gently. We are in the golden time now. The world is young and generous and warm. The Titans have spread themselves across the cosmos like great pillars, holding up the architecture of existence itself. Oceanus flows in his endless circle around the edges of the world, his wife Tethys beside him, together generating the rivers and streams that will nourish every living thing. Hyperion rides his chariot of light across the sky each day, bringing the sun's warmth down to the valleys below. Mnemosyne holds the memories of the world in her vast mind, like a library that stretches beyond all horizons. Themis watches over the invisible laws that keep the stars in their courses and the seasons in their proper order. Each Titan has found their place, their purpose, their particular corner of the cosmos to tend and inhabit. And at the center of all of it, on a throne that Hesiod describes as golden and ancient beyond reckoning, sits Cronus. Now, I want you to understand something about this throne and about the figure who sits upon it, because it matters enormously to everything that follows. When we imagine a king, even a divine one, we tend to imagine someone comfortable in their power, someone who has what they want and enjoys it, someone whose expression, if we could see it, would be one of satisfaction or perhaps of regal boredom, the mild pleasure of a person who has achieved their ambitions and now simply inhabits them. Cronus does not look like that. The ancient sources, when they describe Cronus in his prime, in the height of his power, consistently convey something uneasy about him, something watchful. There is a quality to the way he is depicted that the Greeks themselves recognized and named. They had a word for it, and that word was Deos, a kind of divine anxiety, a fear that belongs specifically to those who hold power and know, somewhere in the back of their magnificent minds, that power can be taken, that it has been taken before, that they themselves are proof of how it can be done. Because that is the trap Cronus has walked into so perfectly, so completely, that it is almost elegant in its cruelty. He knows exactly how thrones are overthrown. He did it himself. He took the sickle. He waited in the shadows. He struck at the moment his father was most vulnerable. And now he sits on the throne his father once occupied, and every day that passes is another day in which some version of himself, younger, hungrier, less careful, might be waiting in the shadows. This is the psychology at the heart of our story, and it is not a psychology that belongs only to gods. Historians who have studied the myths of succession across cultures, from the Babylonian Enuma Elish, which predates Hesiod by perhaps 1,000 years and contains its own story of younger gods overthrowing older ones, to the Norse myths of Odin displacing the earlier Aesir, to the political histories of actual human dynasties from Egypt to Rome, to the courts of medieval Europe. All of them note the same recurring pattern. The revolutionary becomes the conservative. The one who overthrew the established order becomes the fiercest defender of a new established order. The rebel becomes the tyrant, not always out of wickedness, but out of knowledge. Because the revolutionary understands better than anyone how fragile power truly is. Cronus understood this with every fiber of his divine being. And then Rhea told him she was pregnant. Let us speak of Rhea for a moment, because she deserves our attention before we reach the terrible events that will define her story. Rhea was, in many ancient traditions, one of the most important deities in the entire Greek pantheon. And indeed, long before the Greeks gave her that name, versions of her worship existed across the ancient Mediterranean world. She was identified by the Romans as Ops, the goddess of plenty. She was connected by many ancient writers to Cybele, the great mother goddess of Phrygia in Asia Minor, one of the oldest continuous deity traditions in the ancient world, whose worship stretched back perhaps as far as the 7th millennium before the Common Era, making Rhea, or the divine principle she represented, older than writing itself. What did Rhea mean to the ancient Greeks? She was the mother. Not in the limited domestic sense we sometimes give that word today, but in the vast, primal, cosmic sense. She was the source. She was the continuity of life. She was the mountain wilds, the high places where civilization does not reach, where the wind moves through the pines and the eagles turn on the thermals, and something older than human thought is still present. Her name is connected by some scholars to the Greek word for flow, Rhine, because she was the flowing one, the one through whom life itself moves as a river moves through a landscape, shaping it, nourishing it, inexorable, and ultimately unstoppable. She was also, in the way of the Titans, enormously powerful in her own right. She was not a passive figure in this story. She was not a victim. She was a goddess who would be tested beyond all imagining, and who would respond to that testing with a patience and a cunning that would ultimately prove more powerful than all of Cronus's divine strength. But in this early moment, in the warmth of the Golden Age, in the first days of her first pregnancy, she did not yet know what was coming. Or perhaps she suspected, with the intuition that belongs to mothers everywhere and in every age, that something was wrong, that the father of her child did not receive the news with the joy it deserved, that behind his eyes, something ancient and cold was moving like a current beneath still water. Hesiod tells us what happened with the directness that characterizes his poetry. Cronus, he says, swallowed each of his children as they were born. The word he uses in the original Greek is katapino, to drink down, to swallow completely. It is the same word one might use for swallowing water, or wine, or medicine. There is something chilling about that ordinariness, that matter-of-factness, not a great dramatic act of violence, or rather a great dramatic act of violence described in the same tone one might use to describe eating breakfast. The first child was Hestia. Hestia, she who would one day be the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire at the center of every home and every temple, the still point around which family life turns. She was the eldest of Cronus and Rhea's children, and she was also the first to be swallowed and the last to be released, which means that in the order of the world, the goddess of hearth and home spent the longest time in darkness. There is something in that detail that has always struck scholars of mythology as profound. The goddess of domesticity, of safety, of the warm fire that keeps the cold out, experienced the ultimate violation of safety, consumed by the very father who should have protected her. Imagine Rhea in that moment. She has just given birth. She holds her daughter, enormous, luminous, a divine infant of impossible beauty. And Cronus reaches out his hand. The ancient sources do not tell us whether Rhea wept. They do not tell us whether she fought or pleaded or raged. What they tell us is the action. She gave the child to Cronus, and Cronus swallowed her. And then the same thing happened again and again and again, with each new child, until 5 divine beings, 5 potential gods of extraordinary power, were held inside their father's body, alive in the darkness, unable to grow, unable to be born into the world they were meant to inhabit. Let us name them, because they deserve to be named. After Hestia came Demeter, she who would one day be the goddess of grain and harvest, the great nourisher of humanity, whose grief over her own daughter's loss would one day darken the world into its first winter. After Demeter came Hera, the queen of heaven, who would become the wife of Zeus and the goddess of marriage, whose pride and jealousy would become almost as famous in later mythology as her terrible beauty. After Hera came Hades, the lord of the dead, who would eventually rule the underworld with the gravity and the melancholy of one who has spent too long in darkness, which perhaps, having been swallowed as an infant, he had. And after Hades came Poseidon, the earthshaker, the god of the sea and of horses, whose temper would one day rival even Zeus's in its ferocity and reach. 5 children, 5 divine beings, each of extraordinary potential, each destined for a role in the structure of the world, and all of them swallowed, all of them kept in the dark interior of their father's body, as his father's children had been kept in the dark interior of the earth. The pattern, as Uranus had promised, was repeating. Now here is where we must pause and think carefully, as careful historians and thoughtful listeners, about what this myth is actually describing. Because the Greeks were sophisticated storytellers, and the great myths of their tradition are rarely simple stories of this happened, and then this happened. They are symbolic systems, layered with meaning that rewards patient attention. What does it mean that Cronus swallowed his children? On one level, and this is the level that ancient Greek audiences would have understood most immediately, it is a story about the nature of time. Cronus was, in many ancient traditions, closely associated with Kronos, the god of time himself. The similarity of the names led to a conflation in antiquity that modern scholars often disentangle, but that ancient audiences generally allowed to blur together. And time, as any philosopher will tell you, does devour its children. Everything that time creates, time eventually destroys. Every generation that comes into being will eventually be consumed by the forward motion of the ages. There is something in Cronus's swallowing of his children that maps perfectly onto this universal experience, the way the present moment is always consuming the future before it can arrive, the way fathers and mothers of every age have sometimes, consciously or not, tried to prevent their children from surpassing them. On another level, scholars of comparative religion, particularly those who have studied the ancient Near Eastern traditions that predated and influenced Greek mythology, have pointed to a Hittite myth called the Kumarbi cycle, which dates to approximately the 14th or 13th century before the Common Era, and which contains striking parallels to the story of Uranus and Cronus. In the Kumarbi cycle, a god named Anu, whose name means sky, just as Uranus does, is overthrown by his son Kumarbi, who bites off and swallows Anu's genitals during the struggle. This act of swallowing causes Kumarbi to become pregnant with the storm god, who will eventually overthrow him in turn. The parallel to the Greek myth, a sky god overthrown by his son, swallowing as a desperate attempt to contain divine power, a storm god who eventually defeats the swallower, is too precise to be coincidental, and most contemporary scholars believe the Greek tradition was influenced, directly or indirectly, by these older Near Eastern stories, which tells us something remarkable. It tells us that this myth, this particular story about a father's fear of his children, about the desperate and ultimately futile attempt to hold back the next generation, is so old and so fundamental to human experience that it was being told in temples and at firesides for at least 4,000 years before you are lying here listening to it tonight. Perhaps longer. Perhaps as long as there have been fathers and children, and the complicated tangle of love and fear and pride and threat that exists between them. But let us return to the story itself, because we have left Rhea in a very difficult position. 5 children gone. 5 times she has held a new life in her arms and watched it disappear into her husband's mouth. 5 times she has felt the particular horror of that silence after, the absence where a voice should be, the empty arms where weight should rest. And now she is pregnant again for the 6th time, and the child growing inside her is the one that the fates have destined to be different, the one that will not be swallowed, the one that will change everything. The ancient sources differ slightly on exactly how Rhea learned of the destiny of her 6th child. In Hesiod's version, she goes to her own parents, to Gaia and Uranus, and asks them for counsel. This is a detail of extraordinary significance. She goes to the earth and the sky. She goes to the 2 oldest beings in the universe, the original pair, the mother and father of everything that exists. And in doing so, she is doing something that every person who has ever been trapped in an impossible situation has eventually done. She is asking for help from those who have been there before. Think about that for a moment. Gaia knows exactly what it feels like to have her children imprisoned inside another being's body. She lived with it for ages before Cronus freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires. She knows the weight of that grief, the particular quality of that loss, with a perfect and intimate completeness. And Uranus, the defeated sky god, the one who made the prophecy in the first place, he also knows something important. He knows how the pattern works. He has seen it from both sides now. Together, Gaia and Uranus tell Rhea the shape of her destiny. They tell her that yes, Cronus will indeed be overthrown by his own son, just as he overthrew Uranus. They tell her that the 6th child, the one she carries now, is that son. And they tell her what she must do. She must hide him. The location that Gaia and Uranus suggest is specific and carefully chosen. Rhea is to go to the island of Crete, or in some versions of the tradition, to the deep cave of a mountain in Crete, a place called either Mount Ida or the Dictaean Cave, depending on which ancient source you follow. The island of Crete, in historical reality, was one of the oldest centers of civilization in the Aegean world, home of the Minoan culture that preceded even the Mycenaean Greeks, and that worshipped a powerful goddess figure in caves and on mountaintops. When Greek myth places the birthplace of Zeus in Crete, it is, scholars believe, preserving a memory of how Cretan religious traditions influenced and fed into mainland Greek religion. How the worship of a divine child hidden in a cave and raised in secret was an ancient Cretan practice that became absorbed into the story of Zeus's miraculous survival. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Zeus has not been born yet. Rhea is still carrying him, and she has just received her instructions, and now she must implement them with a combination of courage, deception, and the particular practical cunning that the ancient Greeks celebrated above almost every other virtue. The plan has 2 parts. The first part is straightforward. Rhea travels to Crete in secret, makes her way to the sacred cave, and gives birth there, far from Cronus's reach. The second part is the clever part, the part that required not just bravery, but a particular kind of cold-blooded creativity in the face of impossible pressure. Rhea wraps a stone in swaddling clothes, Let us sit with that image for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly extraordinary images in all of Greek mythology. A goddess, grieving and desperate, sitting in a cave on a Mediterranean island, wrapping a stone in the clothing meant for her newborn child, making it look like an infant, making it look like the thing she loves most in the world and is most desperate to protect. The deception is so simple, so humble, so entirely human in its quality. Not a magical solution, not a divine intervention, just a mother's desperate pragmatism, the use of the most basic available material to solve the most urgent possible problem. And when Cronus came for the child, as he always came, inevitable as time, regular as fate, Rhea handed him the bundle. She gave him the stone wrapped in cloth, and Cronus, who was the ruler of the universe, who had overthrown his own father, who commanded the powers of the cosmos, took it and swallowed it whole without looking closely. Without looking closely. This is a detail that has fascinated historians of mythology for generations because it is so psychologically precise, so utterly true to a pattern that repeats endlessly in human history and human psychology. Cronus did not look. He did not examine what he was given. He simply swallowed it. Why? Because the swallowing had become automatic. It had become ritual. It had become the thing he did, the reflex his terror had trained him into, so thoroughly and so completely that he no longer thought about it. He simply acted. Fear had made him mechanical. Fear had removed the very quality, careful attention, genuine seeing that might have saved him. Power without attention. Certainty without examination. These are the precise conditions under which the most secure-seeming regimes have always eventually been undermined. The great Greek historian Thucydides, writing centuries later about the actual political failures of actual human rulers, would identify exactly this quality. The way that the certainty of power makes rulers careless, makes them stop seeing clearly, makes them assume that what they are handed is what they expect, as one of the primary causes of political downfall. He was writing about Athens and Sparta, but he might as well have been writing about Cronus in his cave. The stone went down. Cronus felt it land in the darkness where his other children were held, and he was satisfied. And far away on the island of Crete, in a cave that smelled of thyme and wild honey, a divine child drew his first breath. His name was Zeus. And even now, in this very first moment of his life, the universe around him conspired to protect him in ways that speak to how deeply the ancient Greeks understood the sacred fragility of new life. Because Gaia had thought of everything. She had arranged guardians for the infant god, not divine beings, not mighty warriors, but a group of spirits called the Crete, young men who danced and clashed their weapons and shields together in a rhythmic, thunderous noise that would drown out the crying of the infant if Cronus or any of his servants came near. They danced around the cave entrance, their bronze shields ringing, their feet pounding the earth of Crete, a wall of sound protecting the silence within. Inside the cave, the infant Zeus was nursed by a divine goat named Amaltheia, or in some versions, by a nymph of that name, whose milk was so nourishing, so absolutely full of divine sustenance, that it would give Zeus the strength he would need for everything that came after. Some ancient sources tell us that one of Amaltheia's horns was accidentally broken off during Zeus's infancy, and that Zeus later transformed it into the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, overflowing with endless food and abundance, as a gift to the nymph who had fed him. In this way, even a childhood accident became a gift to the world. And Zeus grew. Quickly, as divine children do, not in years and decades, but in seasons, in months, in the accelerated time of the divine. The same Crete that sheltered him, the same limestone mountains and aromatic hillsides and dark sea-girt shores, shaped him. He grew strong and curious and fierce. He learned the world from the inside of a cave and the outside of a mountain, which is perhaps not the worst education for someone who will one day have to navigate both the deepest depths and the highest heights of existence. But even as he grew, even as his divine strength developed and his understanding of the world deepened, the fundamental situation remained unchanged. 5 brothers and sisters still sat in darkness inside his father's body. The world above was still under Cronus's dominion. Golden and peaceful on the surface, yes, but underpinned by that hidden violence that swallowed truth, that unacknowledged wrong that lay at the center of everything, like a stone in swaddling clothes. The Titans continued their work. Oceanus flowed, Hyperion drove the sun. The world of humans continued in its golden age abundance, unaware of what lay beneath the surface of the peace they enjoyed, unaware that their benevolent ruler sat on his throne with 5 imprisoned gods inside him and one escaped god growing stronger every day in a cave in Crete, unaware that the age of their innocence was already invisibly approaching its end. Cronus, for his part, felt nothing amiss. Or if he did, if some deep divine instinct stirred occasionally in the quiet watches of his eternal nights, he had long since learned to silence it with the same reflex he used for everything else: the swallowing, the suppression, the pushing down of the thing that threatened to rise. He was the master of that art now, or so he believed. He had made himself safe. He had solved the problem that his father's curse had presented him with. He had been cleverer than fate. This is the thought that the ancient Greeks, with their profound understanding of what they called hubris, overweening pride, the particular arrogance of believing oneself exempt from the laws that govern everyone else, would have recognized immediately as the most dangerous thought a powerful being can think. I have solved the problem. I am safe. Because in the world of Greek myth, as in the world of human history, those words, spoken with too much certainty, held with too much comfort, are almost always the last words spoken before everything begins to change. And it was changing already. Deep in the cave on Crete, a young god with his mother's patience and something entirely his own, a quality the Greeks would later call metis, intelligence of the highest order, the cunning that outsmarts not just opponents, but fate itself, was learning everything, learning the shape of the world, learning the nature of power, learning perhaps most importantly what it feels like to be the child that was not swallowed, the one that got away, the one for whom someone made an enormous sacrifice and wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and handed it to a god with trembling hands and a face that showed nothing. Zeus knew, as he grew, what his mother had done for him. He knew what it had cost her, and that knowledge of what love looks like when it has no good options, only the least terrible one, the cold, pragmatic love that wraps a stone in cloth and hands it to a monster. That knowledge lived in him like a fire that never went out. He would need it, all of it. Every lesson the cave had taught him, every skill the mountain had given him, every drop of the divine milk he had drunk from Amaltheia's horn, every year of hiding and growing and waiting and understanding. He would need all of it for what was coming, but the coming of what was coming requires a chapter of its own. For now, let the story rest here, in the time of the waiting. In the long, peaceful, secretly wrong golden age, when the humans slept easily and Cronus sat on his throne and the Crete danced their clanging dance around a cave in Crete. Let the Mediterranean night settle over everything, the warm, dark smell of it, the sound of the Aegean against the limestone cliffs of Crete, the distant flicker of a fire deep in a cave where a divine child sleeps the deep, untroubled sleep of those who are kept safe by love. In that cave, in that darkness, in that particular quality of safety that is all the more precious for being hard-won and secretly held, something is growing that cannot be stopped. But that story, the story of the growing, the planning, the moment when the hidden thing finally reveals itself, belongs to chapter 3. For now, breathe slowly. Let the rhythm of your breathing become the rhythm of the sea against the shore of Crete. Let the darkness of your room become the darkness of the cave, warm, not cold, safe, the kind of darkness that holds something precious inside it. But the Greeks were wiser than that impatience. They knew something that modern psychology has spent centuries rediscovering and naming and measuring, that who you become is inseparable from where you were and how you grew and what you learned in the years before the world knew your name, that the cave shapes the god as surely as the forge shapes the blade, that Zeus, when he finally stands before his father and demands the return of his swallowed siblings, will not be acting out of simple destiny or divine entitlement. He will be acting from everything the cave of Crete taught him. So let us go slowly here. Let us spend time in the cave. Let us learn what Zeus learned. The cave. And here we must be precise because the Greeks were precise about sacred geography in ways that mattered deeply to them, was located in the heart of Crete, that long curved island in the southern Aegean that looks, if you examine an ancient map, rather like a great fish swimming westward through wine-dark water. The ancient Greeks debated among themselves which specific cave and which specific mountain had been the site of Zeus's birth and childhood. Some said it was the Dictaean Cave, near the eastern end of the island, a great limestone cavern that actual archaeological excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries revealed to have been a site of continuous religious worship from at least the Middle Minoan period, perhaps 2000 before the Common Era, down through the Roman imperial period, a span of continuous sacred use stretching across 2,000 years. Votive offerings were found there in extraordinary abundance: bronze figures, terracotta statuettes, double axes, weapons, jewelry, all of it left by worshippers who believed, or wanted to believe, or needed to believe, that something sacred had happened in this particular darkness. Others said the birthplace was the Dictaean Cave, higher up on Mount Ida in the center of the island. And this cave too has been the subject of archaeological excavation, and this cave too has yielded extraordinary evidence of long and devoted religious use. The debate between these two traditions was ancient even in antiquity, and both caves drew pilgrims from across the Greek world for centuries. The philosopher Pythagoras, that most enigmatic and fascinating of ancient thinkers, is said to have retreated to the Dictaean Cave for a period of spiritual purification. The great Cretan philosopher Epimenides, who was said to have slept in a sacred cave for 57 years and awakened with divine knowledge, is connected to the same sacred geography. What matters for our story is not which cave specifically, but what the cave represented. And what the cave represented was this: the hidden place, the necessary darkness before the light. the protected space in which something that cannot yet defend itself is kept safe until it is strong enough to emerge. Every tradition, in every culture, has some version of this image. The hero hidden in the rushes, the infant placed in a basket on the river, the divine child concealed from the destroyer by the ingenuity of those who love him, Moses in the bulrushes, Romulus and Remus nursed by the she-wolf in their cave, the infant Dionysus hidden and disguised. The pattern repeats because it reflects something true, something about the nature of new things in the world, about their fragility and their eventual power, about the way the most transformative forces often spend a long period of invisibility before they become visible. Zeus in his cave was invisible. And invisibility, for a god who would one day make the sky itself his instrument, who would one day command lightning and thunder and the movement of the clouds. For such a god, invisibility was the first and perhaps the most important lesson. Amaltheia fed him. Let us spend a moment with Amaltheia, because she is one of those figures in Greek mythology who deserves far more attention than she usually receives. The ancient sources are divided, as they often are, on exactly what she was. In some traditions, she was a divine goat, not an ordinary animal, but a being of supernatural beauty and power, with horns that glowed silver in the dark and eyes that held within them the calm, deep intelligence of those who have lived very long and seen very much. In other traditions, she was a nymph, one of those intermediate divine beings, less than a god, but more than human, who inhabited the wild places of the world and served as intermediaries between the divine and the natural. In either form, what she gave Zeus was nourishment of the most fundamental kind: milk, the first food, the original sustenance. And in the world of Greek myth, what you are fed in your earliest days is not merely physical nutrition, it is a kind of transmission. It shapes the nature of what you become. The divine milk of Amaltheia did not merely keep Zeus alive, it made him what he was: strong, enduring, capable of the kind of sustained effort that the task before him would require. There is a story within the story here that the ancient Greeks loved to tell. One day, in the early days of his divine infancy, Zeus was playing, as divine infants apparently do, with too much force and too little awareness of his own strength, and he accidentally broke off one of Amaltheia's horns. The horn fell to the ground, and because this was a divine being, and therefore nothing connected to her could be entirely ordinary, the horn immediately began to overflow with good things, with fruit and grain and flowers and all the abundance of the earth. Zeus, feeling the particular remorse of the child who has broken something precious in an excess of careless energy, transformed the horn into something permanent and beautiful, the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, which would forever pour forth its abundance in gratitude for the nourishment Amaltheia had given him. What I find endlessly interesting about this story is what it reveals about Zeus's character, even in infancy. He broke something, he acknowledged it, and he made it better, not by pretending it hadn't happened, not by trying to restore it to its original form, but by transforming the broken thing into something new and more generous than what it had been before. This is the pattern of Zeus's particular kind of intelligence, the ability to take what is broken and find within it the possibility of something that never existed before. It will serve him well. But milk, however divine, was not the only nourishment the cave provided, because Rhea came. She came as often as she could, moving between the world of Cronus's golden court and the secret cave in Crete, with the careful, deliberate normalcy of someone who has learned to perform ordinary life while living an entirely other one beneath the surface. She sat in the cave with her son, and she talked to him. She told him things. What did Rhea tell Zeus? The ancient sources do not record her exact words. They rarely do, for the conversations that matter most, the ones that happen in small spaces between two people who love each other in complicated circumstances. But we can infer, from the shape of what Zeus eventually knew and eventually did, something of what his mother must have taught him in those hours in the cave. She told him about his siblings, about Hestia, who had been first, the eldest, the gentle one, whose soft golden light had vanished into darkness before she had ever seen the sun. About Demeter, in whom the growing things of the world were held like seeds in winter soil. About Hera, proud and magnificent, whose queenly nature had been evident even in the moment of her birth. About Hades, quiet and deep, who had gone into the darkness with a gravity that seemed almost appropriate for one who would eventually rule it. About Poseidon, wild and kinetic, whose oceanic nature had been visible in the way he moved, in the restless power of him even as an infant. 5 siblings, 5 divine beings, each carrying within them a portion of the world's potential, each held in darkness inside their father's body. Zeus grew up knowing this. He grew up with the knowledge of their absence as a constant presence, the shape of what was missing outlined in the air around him wherever he went. And Rhea told him something else. She told him what Cronus had been like before the swallowing. Not a monster. This is important, and it is something the ancient Greeks insisted upon with a sophistication that modern retellings sometimes flatten. Cronus had not been evil. He had been frightened. There is a difference. He had been a son who overthrew a cruel father, who liberated his siblings, who ruled with genuine justice during the Golden Age, who would have been remembered differently if not for the curse and the fear and the terrible choice he had made in response to both. Rhea told Zeus this not to excuse Cronus, but because she was wise enough to know that her son would need to understand his father completely if he was ever going to successfully oppose him. Know what you are fighting. Know why it became what it is. Know its original shape before fear deformed it. This is counsel that has served strategists and healers and peacemakers throughout human history. And Rhea gave it to her hidden son in a cave on Crete, long before any of them were born. The cave also taught Zeus things that no one told him directly, things the place itself conveyed. It taught him patience, because living hidden requires patience of a kind that open life does not demand. You cannot act freely when you are hidden. You cannot move without thinking about the consequences. Every choice must be measured against the possibility of exposure and the weight of that constant calculation, maintaining the secret, protecting the hiding place, never forgetting that outside the cave walls, a divine ruler with the power of the cosmos at his command would destroy you if he knew you existed. That weight teaches a particular quality of stillness that is not passivity. It is readiness. The readiness of someone who waits not because they have nothing to do, but because they know the right moment has not yet come. It taught him darkness. Not the darkness of despair, but the practical, informational darkness of the cave itself. Those who have spent time in limestone cave systems, and I am thinking here of the actual archaeological expeditions to the Dictaean and Idaean caves, whose participants have written about the experience of going deep inside them, beyond the reach of daylight, describe a darkness that is absolute and encompassing in a way that ordinary nighttime darkness never is. it is the darkness of geological time, the darkness of the deep earth. And spending your early life within that darkness, with only firelight and starlight at the cave entrance and the silver glow of Amaltheia to orient you, teaches your eyes to find light in unexpected places, teaches you that even in absolute darkness, the darkness is not empty. Things move in it. Things exist in it. The hidden is not the same as the non-existent. Zeus would need to know this, because his siblings existed in a darkness that was even more complete than his cave, and he would need to believe, absolutely and without wavering, in the reality of things he could not see. It taught him also the particular intimacy of small spaces shared with those who love you. The cave held Rhea's visits and Amaltheia's warmth, and the dancing and clashing of the Cretes at the entrance. It held the smell of time blown in on the mountain wind. It held the sound of the Aegean if you climbed to the cave mouth and listened in the right direction on a still night. These small, contained beauties, the love that comes to you in a limited space and makes that space sufficient. These are what Zeus was formed by, not the grandeur of open sky and unlimited horizon, not yet. First the cave, first the necessary limitation, first the learning of what is enough. As Zeus grew older, and remember that divine time moves differently from human time, that what we are measuring here is not years in any simple sense, but stages of becoming, ripening, the slow accumulation of power and understanding that prepares a being for their purpose. As he grew, the cave became smaller, not literally. The limestone did not shrink around him, but he was growing larger in every sense, and the cave that had been sufficient for an infant was becoming insufficient for what he was becoming. He began to go out, carefully at first, in darkness, learning the geography of the mountain above the cave, the feel of Cretan soil beneath his feet, the different texture of limestone from granite, the way the mountain goats moved along the high ridges in the early morning, the quality of the light at different times of day over the Aegean. He was learning the world by touch and smell and sound before he was ready to claim it. He met the island, and Crete, that ancient place, received him with the particular generosity of a land that has been inhabited and loved for so long that it has a kind of accumulated spiritual warmth, the warmth of all the generations of human hands that have worked its soil, all the human feet that have walked its paths, all the human voices that have filled its air with prayer and song and story. The Minoans had been there before the Greeks, before the Minoans, others. Layer upon layer of human devotion had saturated the landscape of Crete, and Zeus moved through it and absorbed it, and it shaped him in ways that the purely divine realm, with its absolutes and its certainties and its lack of human texture, could not have done. This is perhaps the most radical claim embedded in the myth of Zeus's Cretan childhood, the claim that the ancient Greeks were making without quite saying directly, that a god raised among traces of humanity is different from a god who was never touched by it. That proximity to the human, to its smallness, its brevity, its extraordinary ingenuity in the face of limitation, changes even the divine, makes it in some ways more capable of justice, more capable of understanding what the world actually needs rather than what power simply wants. Zeus watched the human world below him, and it mattered to him. It would continue to matter to him throughout his divine life, in ways that his father Cronus, who had ruled over humans as one rules over a pleasant landscape, with benevolent indifference, had never quite managed. There came a time when the cave was not enough, and the mountain was not enough, and Crete itself, beloved and formative as it was, had given Zeus everything it had to give. The Curetes still danced at the cave entrance, though by now their dancing was perhaps more ceremonial than necessary. Zeus did not need protection from discovery so much as he needed the accumulated knowledge of when to act. And that knowledge came, as it tends to come, not through a dramatic revelation, but through a quiet, accumulating certainty, a sense of readiness that built gradually, day by day, in the way that a tide builds, without you noticing any single wave's contribution until suddenly the water is around your ankles. Zeus was ready. But ready for what, precisely? This is where the myth makes one of its most interesting and least immediately obvious moves. Because Zeus's problem was not simply how to overthrow Cronus. Overthrowing Cronus was the last step, and in many ways the straightforward one. Zeus was a god of extraordinary power, the son of the most powerful Titan, and he had the fates promise that he would succeed. The more immediate problem was the swallowed siblings. They were inside Cronus. They were alive inside Cronus. Any direct confrontation that resulted in Cronus's death would also result in their deaths. What Zeus needed was not simply to defeat his father, but to force him to release what he had swallowed, to make the swallowing reverse itself. This required not just strength, it required exactly the kind of intelligence his childhood had developed in him. The intelligence that looks at a problem and does not simply charge at it directly, but circles it, considers its shape from all angles, asks what it needs rather than what is available to give it. The solution, when it came from an unexpected direction. It came from Gaia. Gaia, the great earth, the grandmother of Zeus, the one who had set this entire chain of events in motion by giving the sickle to Cronus, who had counseled Rhea in her hour of desperation, who had been present at every critical turning point in the story from the very beginning. Gaia had not been idle during the years of Zeus's cave childhood. She had been watching. She had been tending her plan with the patience of geological time, adjusting it, refining it, waiting for the right moment in the way that the earth itself waits, slowly, inexorably, with absolute confidence in eventual outcomes. She came to Zeus, and she brought with her a gift. The gift was knowledge, and it came in the form of counsel about a substance, a draft, a divine preparation, something that could be mixed into Cronus's drink that would cause him to vomit up what he had swallowed. Let us pause here and appreciate the elegance of this solution. The problem was swallowing. The answer was unswallowing. The disorder had been caused by an act of consumption, and it would be resolved by an act of regurgitation. The symmetry is beautiful and deeply Greek. The ancient Greeks had a profound appreciation for the way that the resolution of a great wrong must match the shape of the wrong itself, must undo it by reversing its essential nature rather than simply obliterating it. And who would administer this draft? Not Zeus directly. He could not simply walk up to his father and hand him something to drink without revealing himself, which would collapse the plan before it could succeed. The plan required an intermediary. It required someone who was already close to Cronus, someone whose presence at his table would not raise suspicion. This is where one of the most fascinating figures in the entire story enters, a figure that many casual retellings of Greek mythology overlook almost entirely. The ancient Orphic tradition, a mystical religious movement within ancient Greece that had its own distinctive versions of the mythological stories, tells us that the intermediary was Metis. Metis. Her name means wisdom or cunning intelligence. or the kind of practical cleverness that finds solutions where none appear to exist. She was an Oceanid, a daughter of the Titan Oceanus and his wife Tethys, one of 3,000 divine daughters of the endless river that circled the world. She was brilliant in the way that very few beings in the ancient world were described as brilliant. Not merely intelligent, not merely knowledgeable, but possessed of that particular quality of mind that can see through the surface of things to their underlying structure, that can find the hidden seam in what appears to be solid stone. Zeus had found Metis, or Metis had found Zeus. The sources are characteristically ambiguous about this, as if the coming together of two such minds was more mutual recognition than either one's achievement. And they had formed an alliance that would be the first great partnership of Zeus's long divine career. She would become, eventually, much more than an ally. But in this moment, what she was exactly what was needed. Someone clever enough to be trusted with the most important deception in the history of the divine world. It was Metis who obtained the draft. It was Metis who found the way to get close enough to Cronus to administer it. Some versions of the tradition say she disguised herself as a cupbearer, someone so low in the hierarchy of Cronus's court that he would not look at her carefully, just as he had not looked carefully at the stone in swaddling clothes. His blindness to the unimportant, to the beneath notice, to the serving and the small, being not just a character flaw, but a structural vulnerability that those of Metis's quality of mind could recognize and use. Others say that Metis worked openly, presenting herself at Cronus's court in some capacity that gave her legitimate access to his table. In either version, the critical element is the same. She got close enough to do the thing, and then she did it. The draft went into Cronus's drink. Cronus drank, as he always drank, with the unconcerned pleasure of a being who has no reason to suspect that anything around him has changed, that anything has crept past the high walls of his self-certainty and his long habit of getting exactly what he expected. And then everything changed. What happened next is described by the ancient sources with a kind of epic economy, a few powerful lines in Hesiod, expanded slightly in later traditions, that somehow makes it more rather than less affecting. Cronus, the ruler of the cosmos, the king of the Titans, the Golden Age sovereign whose power had seemed absolute and eternal, felt something shift inside him, something deep and wrong and irreversible. He vomited. He vomited the stone first, the stone that had been the first thing he swallowed after receiving it from Rhea, the stone that he had believed was his sixth child, the one that had satisfied his certainty that the threat was contained, the stone that was the foundation of his false security for all the years of Zeus's hidden childhood. That stone came out first, and it fell to the earth, and it landed at a place called Delphi, the navel of the world, and there it was kept for centuries afterward, an actual physical object that pilgrims could see and touch, a stone that was both a monument to Rhea's ingenuity and a reminder of Cronus's blindness. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most significant religious institutions in the ancient Greek world, was established at this same site, as if the very ground where the deception was revealed had absorbed some quality of truth-telling that then became available to those who knew how to ask the right questions. And then the others came. Poseidon first, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, then Hestia, in reverse order of their swallowing, the last imprisoned, the first released. 5 gods tumbling back into the light of the world, each of them divine and fully formed, each of them carrying within them all the years of their darkness, all the time that had passed while they were held inside their father's body, unable to grow in any outward sense, but accumulating perhaps their own kind of interior knowledge of what it is to exist in confined darkness and wait. Think about what it must have been like in that moment of release. The sudden overwhelming assault of light after an age of darkness. The physical sensation of expansion, of going from the cramped interior of another being's body to the vast open air of the world. The smell of it, the sound of it, the feeling of wind for the first time, of ground under feet that have never stood on ground before. And then gradually, the sight of each other, siblings meeting siblings for the first time, recognizing in each other's faces something of their own experience, the shared mark of the swallowed. And then, perhaps most extraordinary of all, the sight of their brother, the one who had not been swallowed, the one who had grown up elsewhere in light and air and the complex nourishment of a hidden but inhabited world, while they had been held in darkness. Zeus standing before them, already powerful, already marked by everything his cave childhood had given him, already carrying within him the seeds of the leadership he would exercise in the war to come. What did they say to each other in that first moment? The ancient sources do not tell us. They give us action, not dialogue, in the great tradition of epic storytelling that trusts the imagination of the audience to fill the spaces between events with appropriate emotional weight. But they recognized each other. That much is certain. And in that recognition, in the meeting of 5 gods who had lived in darkness with one god who had lived in hiding, all of them shaped by their particular form of concealment, all of them carrying the marks of a father's fear. In that recognition, the coalition that would overthrow Cronus was born. But we are running ahead of ourselves again, and this story does not want to be hurried, because before the war, the great Titanomachy, the 10-year conflict that would shake the cosmos to its foundations and determine the shape of divine governance for all time after. Before any of that, there was the moment of gathering. The moment when Zeus looked at his siblings and they looked at him, and the question that hung in the air between them was not whether to fight, but how. And that question, as it always does when asked by beings of genuine intelligence in genuine need, required thought before it required action. Rhea came. She came to the reunion of her children with the expression of someone who has held a secret so long and so tightly that the act of releasing it produces something that is not quite joy and not quite relief, but is a third thing, its own distinct emotion, the particular release of someone who has carried an impossible weight and is now, finally, permitted to set it down. She looked at all 6 of her children together for the first time. 6 divine beings, each carrying within them a portion of the world's possibility, each alive, each free. And Gaia came also, the ancient earth, the great-grandmother, the one whose plan this had always been at the deepest level, whose wound had set everything in motion, whose counsel had guided Rhea, whose knowledge of the divine draft had given Zeus the means of his siblings' liberation. She came, and she looked at what her patience had produced, and if the earth itself seemed to breathe differently in that moment, if the ground felt more settled and more certain under every living thing's feet, perhaps that is because the oldest being in the world had just seen a very long plan reach its next stage. Its next stage, not its completion, because the completion was still 10 years of war away, still an entire cosmic conflict away, still the defeat of Cronus and the binding of the Titans and the drawing of lots for the governance of the 3 realms away. The story was not finished. It was barely, in one sense, beginning, but something essential had happened. The 6 children of Cronus and Rhea stood in the light of the world together for the first time. They were alive. They were free. They were, all of them, marked by their particular darknesses in ways that would define everything they would become. Hestia with her quality of still, centered fire. Demeter with her bone-deep knowledge of what it means for growing things to be denied the light. Hera with the proud and wounded dignity of one who was always royalty, even in captivity. Hades with his affinity for darkness that had become not a trauma, but a landscape he knew intimately. Poseidon with the barely contained kinetic wildness of an ocean too long compressed. And Zeus with the patience, the cunning, the capacity for strategic vision, and the deep knowledge of human things that his cave childhood on Crete had given him. Zeus who had never been swallowed, and who therefore carried something the others did not, the knowledge of what freedom feels like when it is all you have ever known. The knowledge of what it is to be the child who was saved, and to carry the weight of that saving as a permanent obligation toward those who were not. The war that would come from this gathering would be the subject of songs for 3,000 years. The Titanomachy, the battle of the Titans against the Olympians, of the old divine order against the new, is one of the foundational events of all Greek mythology, and it deserves and will receive a full chapter of its own. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight we end here, in the gathering, in the extraordinary, improbable, hard-won moment when 6 gods stand in the open air together and look at each other and recognize that they are more together than the sum of their separate darknesses. That the cave knowledge and the swallowed knowledge and the flowing knowledge of their mother and the ancient knowledge of their grandmother can be combined into something that did not exist before. That they are together something Cronus never imagined, something ready. Let that readiness settle into you as your breathing slows and your thoughts drift, and the story begins to dissolve at the edges into the comfortable formlessness of approaching sleep. You are lying in the dark, as the swallowed gods lay in the dark, as Zeus lay in his cave, as every being that has ever waited for the right moment has lain in the dark, not defeated, not passive, but accumulating, becoming, preparing. The war is coming. It will shake the foundations of the world. It will be louder and more terrible and more magnificent than anything the cosmos has yet produced. It will last 10 years by the measure of the gods, which is an incomprehensible span by any human reckoning, and at the end of it the world will be arranged differently, and something new will govern it, and nothing will ever be quite the same as it was in the Golden Age. The Titanomachy. The name itself carries weight. Titano, the Titans, those vast original beings of divine power and primordial certainty. Machi, from the Greek word for battle, mache, the same root that gives us such words as logomachy and theomachy, and all the other ancient compounds that describe the meeting of great forces in irresolvable conflict. The Battle of the Titans. The war that lasted 10 years by divine reckoning, that shook the foundations of the cosmos from its highest peaks to its deepest roots, that ended with the old order bound in darkness and the new order rising to take its place. This is the chapter of noise, of the ground moving, of the sky tearing itself open and closing again, of things so large and so powerful meeting in conflict that the very structure of the world shook around them like a leaf in a storm. But before we reach the noise, we must understand what came before it, because wars of this magnitude do not begin with the first blow. They begin with the long, careful preparation that precedes the first blow. They begin with the gathering of allies, the assessment of strengths and weaknesses, the recognition of what is at stake and what will be required. They begin, in short, with exactly the kind of strategic intelligence that Zeus's cave childhood had spent years developing in him. So let us begin where the war truly began. Not with thunder, with thought. Zeus looked at his siblings, and his siblings looked at him, and together they looked at the world they were proposing to contest, and what they saw was not encouraging. On one side, the Titans, 12 original beings of extraordinary divine power, each of them ancient in a way that the children of Cronus, however divine, were not. Oceanus, who was the river that surrounded the world, whose power was literally the boundary of existence itself. Hyperion, who drove the sun. Iapetus, whose children, Prometheus, Epimetheus, Atlas, would become significant figures in their own right. Themis, who held the laws of the universe in her understanding. Mnemosyne, in whose memory the entirety of what had ever existed was preserved. Coeus and Phoebe, whose knowledge was cosmic in its scope. And Cronus himself, who had ruled the universe for an age, and whose power, whatever the divine draft had done to his confidence, was entirely intact. On the other side, 6 young gods, freshly born into the world's light, 2 of them having spent their entire existence until this moment in the interior darkness of their father's body, one having grown up in a cave, none of them having fought anything, none of them knowing what they were capable of, none of them having any real experience of their own divine power under conditions of actual pressure. By any reasonable assessment, the Titans should have won. By any calculation of raw power, of experience, of accumulated divine authority, the old order should have held. And indeed, this is precisely why the war lasted 10 years rather than ending in a single afternoon. Because the Titans were formidable, and the young gods were learning as they fought. And every year of the conflict was a year in which the gap between theoretical divine power and actual mastery narrowed. But Zeus had advantages that raw power calculations do not capture. He had Metis. He had the counsel of Gaia. He had the strategic patience his cave childhood had given him. And he had something that the Titans, in their long golden certainty, had entirely failed to develop: the willingness to ask for help from unexpected places. It was Gaia who told him where to look. The earth remembers everything. This is one of the deepest and most persistent beliefs in the ancient Greek religious tradition, that the ground beneath your feet is not merely physical material, but a kind of accumulated memory. That what has happened on and in the earth leaves traces that the earth retains long after human and divine minds have forgotten. Gaia embodied this principle absolutely. She remembered what Uranus had forgotten, what Cronus had ignored, what the long, peaceful centuries of the Golden Age had buried under layers of prosperity and contentment. She remembered the Cyclopes, and she remembered the Hecatoncheires. These names deserve a pause. We encountered them in the first chapter of our story, in those earliest moments of creation when Uranus and Gaia were generating their children. The Titans first, then the Cyclopes, then those 3 beings of impossible physicality whose 100 hands and 50 heads had so terrified their father that he had imprisoned them in Tartarus rather than let them exist in the light of the world. They had been there ever since, down in the deepest dark, down below the roots of mountains, below the floors of oceans, below even the dead, down in the original abyss, chained, waiting, forgotten by the world above, but not by Gaia. Never by Gaia. Cronus, when he had come to power, had freed his Titan siblings from Tartarus, had kept the promise his mother extracted from him before she gave him the sickle, but he had not freed the Cyclopes or the Hecatoncheires. Whether out of the same terror his father had felt, or out of a calculation that beings of such power were better controlled than liberated, or simply because the curse and the prophecy and the business of ruling the world had given him enough to think about. Whatever the reason, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires had remained in their chains, in their darkness, for the entire length of the Golden Age and beyond. Zeus went to Tartarus to free them. Let us appreciate the audacity of this for a moment. Zeus, a young god with no experience of combat and no established divine authority, descending into the deepest abyss in the universe, into a place of such fundamental darkness and despair that even gods were not meant to go there lightly to liberate 3 Cyclopes and 3 Hecatoncheires who had been imprisoned for longer than memory could reach and whose power was effectively incalculable. The ancient sources tell us that before Zeus descended, Gaia counseled him carefully. She told him what he would find. She told him what to bring, nectar and ambrosia, the food and drink of the gods, to revive beings who had been sustained by nothing but the darkness for an age. She told him how to speak to them, not as a liberator claiming gratitude, not as a commander expecting obedience, but as something the imprisoned have rarely encountered and therefore respond to with a loyalty that goes beyond calculation, as one who comes with no agenda beyond the doing of what is right. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Stirrups, Argus, Thunder, Lightning, Bright. Their names describe what they would give, because when Zeus found them and broke their chains and fed them the divine food that restored their strength, they responded not merely with gratitude, but with creation. The Cyclopes were makers, craftsmen of divine power, possessed of a skill in the working of natural forces that had no equivalent anywhere in the cosmos. They made for Zeus the Thunderbolt, that weapon of weapons, the concentrated force of lightning shaped into something wielded, the storm's power given form and direction. They made for Poseidon the Trident, that 3-pronged instrument of oceanic force that could shake the earth and part the seas. They made for Hades the helm of darkness, the cap of invisibility, which would allow its wearer to move through any space unseen. 3 weapons, 3 gifts from 3 makers who had spent an age in darkness and now poured all of that contained time, all of that accumulated creative energy into the making of things that had never existed before. The Thunderbolt, particularly, was transformative. It was not merely a weapon in the conventional sense. It was an expression of Zeus's divine nature made physical, the storm god's essential self given form. When Zeus held the Thunderbolt for the first time, the ancient sources suggest something like completion, like recognition, the particular sensation of picking up something that was always yours, but that you had never held before. The bolt crackled in his hand, and the sky above, which had always been Uranus's domain and then Cronus's domain, suddenly trembled with the foreknowledge of a different kind of sovereignty. The Hecatoncheires were something else entirely. Cottus, Briareus, Gyges, these 3 beings, each with 50 heads and 100 hands, were not craftsmen, but warriors of a scale that defied normal categories of combat. 100 hands. Think about what that means in a battle. 100 hands, each capable of lifting and throwing a boulder the size of a house. 100 hands working simultaneously, in coordination, with the directed intelligence of 50 heads behind them. They were not merely powerful. They were, in a very real sense, a force of nature given will and loyalty. Zeus freed them and fed them, and spoke to them honestly about what was coming. And Briareos, speaking for all three, gave his answer in the words that Hesiod preserves. They would fight. They would stand with Zeus and his siblings against Cronus and the Titans. They would repay their liberation with everything they had. The alliance was formed. Now we must speak about the geography of the war, because it matters enormously to the story, and because the Greeks, who were, among other things, extraordinarily precise observers of landscape and terrain, embedded within the myth a geographical understanding that reflects actual physical features of the Greek world. The Titans, when they understood that war was coming, established their base on Mount Othrys. Othrys is a real mountain. It still exists in the region of Thessaly in central Greece, a broad massif that rises to nearly 1,800 meters and that dominates the landscape around it with the kind of presence that makes it easy to understand why ancient people would have seen it as a natural seat of divine power. From Othrys, you can see enormous distances in every direction. You occupy the high ground. You command the view. The Titans chose well in the military sense. They took the defensible position, the established stronghold, the place from which they could observe everything that moved against them. Zeus and his allies established their base on Mount Olympus. Also a real mountain, the highest peak in the Greek world, its summit reaching nearly 2,917 meters, perpetually wreathed in cloud and mist in a way that made it seem to ancient observers as if it occupied a different atmospheric layer from the rest of the world, as if it were simultaneously on Earth and above it, a threshold between the human and the divine. Olympus and Othrys face each other across the plain of Thessaly like two great stone fists raised in opposition. And between them, in the mythological geography of the Titanomachy, the battle would be fought. 10 years. By divine reckoning, 10 years of sustained conflict without resolution, without either side achieving the decisive advantage that would end it. The ancient sources, Hesiod most fully, but also later traditions preserved in the works of Apollodorus and others, describe the war in terms that strain at the boundaries of physical description. The earth shook to its roots, the sea boiled, the sky was torn with fire. The sound of the fighting reached into every corner of the cosmos, so that even the dead in their dim underworld realm felt the reverberations overhead and trembled. The Titans fought with everything that divine age and divine certainty could bring. Cronus in particular. And here we must grant him the dignity of a worthy adversary, because the myth demands it, and because the Greeks were too sophisticated to make their conflicts simple. Cronus fought not merely as a tyrant defending his power, but as a being who genuinely, at some level, believed in the order he was defending. The Golden Age had been real. Its peace had been real. The prosperity under his governance had been real. He was fighting for that, for the world he had built and maintained and believed in, even if the foundation of it was a swallowed wrong. This is what makes the Titanomachy more than a simple story of good overthrowing evil. Both sides believed in their cause. Both sides were fighting for a genuine vision of how the world should be ordered. The Titans were not villains in any simple sense. They were the previous generation, the established order, the beings whose way of governance had created everything that existed and who could not imagine or would not accept that a different kind of governance was needed. The young gods were fighting for something they could feel but not yet fully articulate, a different relationship between divine power and the world it governs, a different kind of authority, one that would involve more complexity and more justice, and more engagement with the ongoing needs of what lives below the divine. They were fighting for a world they had not yet built, against a world that existed and worked, and had its own deep validity. 10 years, and neither side could tip the balance. Then the Hecatoncheires entered the battle in full. Hesiod's description of this moment is one of the most genuinely sublime passages in all of ancient literature. And I use that word in its precise sense, the sense that Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and the philosophers of aesthetic experience would have recognized. The sublime as the encounter with something so vast and so powerful that it exceeds the capacity of ordinary comprehension and produces simultaneously terror and awe, the annihilation of the merely human scale of things in the presence of the genuinely overwhelming. Codus and Briareos and Gyges, 100 hands each, 300 hands between them, each lifting a boulder too large for any ordinary being to move, each launching it with the force of divine strength multiplied by the mechanical advantage of simultaneous action. 900 boulders at once, launched in a sustained barrage that the ancient sources describe as like a storm, no, worse than a storm, like the world itself turning inside out, like the sky and the earth trading places, like every mountain in existence deciding simultaneously to throw itself at everything else. The Titans had never encountered this, nothing in their experience, not the wars of their father's time, not the long centuries of the Golden Age, not the first 9 years of conflict against the young gods, had prepared them for what it felt like to stand in the path of that. The ground under their feet became unreliable. The sky above them was no longer sky, but falling rock. The air itself seemed to have declared war on them. They broke. The Titans broke, and the rout was absolute. And what had been a 10-year stalemate became, in a single terrible afternoon, a total defeat. Cronus fled. The Titans fled. And Zeus and Poseidon and Hades and their allies pursued them across the shaking world, driving them downward, downward, away from Othrys and away from the light and the air and the open world they had governed, downward through the layers of the earth into the deepest place that exists, into Tartarus. The binding of the Titans in Tartarus is one of the most symbolically rich moments in all of Greek mythology, and it rewards careful attention. Tartarus, as the ancient Greeks conceived it, was not merely a prison. It was a cosmological location, the deepest part of existence, the furthest point from the light, the place where the universe's original darkness was most concentrated and most permanent. Hesiod, in one of his most extraordinary passages, tries to give his audience a sense of the scale of it. He says that a bronze anvil dropped from the surface of the earth would fall for 9 days and nights before reaching Tartarus. He says that Tartarus is as far below the earth as the earth is below the sky. He is trying, with the mathematics of human experience, days, distances, the familiar weight of a falling object, to convey something that exceeds human mathematics entirely. The sheer depth of the place. And in this place, the Titans were imprisoned, surrounded by a bronze wall, guarded in a symmetry that the myth clearly intends as meaningful by the Hecatoncheires, those 3 beings who had themselves been imprisoned in Tartarus by the Titan's father, and who were now the guardians of the Titan's imprisonment. The watchers becoming the watched. The imprisoned becoming the imprisoners, the wheel turning, but turning this time towards something that at least had the quality of deliberate justice rather than mere fear. But here we must register something that separates Zeus from both his father and his grandfather in a way that the ancient Greeks clearly found important, a way that explains why Zeus was considered the ruler of justice rather than simply the latest in a line of divine strong men. He did not kill them. Uranus had imprisoned his children in the earth, unable to kill them because of their divine nature. Cronus had freed them. then swallowed his own children rather than kill them for the same reason. But Zeus had won a complete victory, had the vanquished entirely at his mercy, had every practical justification for permanent annihilation if such a thing were possible. And he chose imprisonment over annihilation. He chose the binding over the obliteration. There are several ways to read this choice. The most practical is that the divine nature of the Titans made their destruction impossible in any absolute sense. You can bind a divine being, you can constrain it, you can remove it from active participation in the world, but you cannot make it cease to exist entirely. The divine in Greek mythology is permanent in a way that nothing else is. But there is a more interesting reading, one that several ancient commentators suggest, and that modern scholars of Greek religion have developed, that Zeus's choice to preserve rather than destroy reflected his understanding of what the Titans represented. They were not merely enemies, they were the previous order. They were the generation from which he himself had come. They held within them the accumulated divine wisdom and power of the earliest age of the world, and that wisdom and power, however misapplied or however shaped by fear and the logic of self-preservation, was not something to be simply erased. It was something to be contained and learned from, and eventually, though this lies far beyond the scope of our story tonight, released again. One Titan was not bound in Tartarus. Atlas, the son of the Titan Iapetus, nephew of Cronus, who had fought against the Olympians with a ferocity and a commitment that singled him out even in that company of formidable warriors, Atlas received a punishment proportional to his particular strength. He was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world, at the point where the earth met the sky, and to hold the sky upon his shoulders for eternity. Think about what this means. The sky, the domain that had been Uranus's original realm, that Cronus had claimed after his father's fall, that Zeus was now inheriting as the new sovereign of the divine order. The sky had to be held up. It did not simply stay in place on its own. Something was required to maintain the separation between heaven and earth, to keep the cosmos from collapsing back into the formless unity from which it had emerged. And the being tasked with that maintenance was Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, condemned to a labor that was infinite in its duration and perfectly suited to his particular quality of power. There is a melancholy beauty to Atlas's fate that the Greeks clearly felt, because he appears repeatedly in their mythology and their art, always in the same posture, bent beneath the enormous weight, his face showing the particular expression of one who has accepted an unending burden with something that is not resignation, but is not quite hope either. Just endurance. Just the putting of one divine foot in front of the other, the maintenance of the necessary holding day after day in the permanent twilight of the world's western edge. The other exception was Prometheus. But Prometheus's story is so large and so consequential and so deeply entangled with the story of humanity itself that it would overwhelm our current chapter to include it fully here. What matters for our immediate purposes is that Prometheus, also a son of Iapetus, therefore also a nephew of Cronus, also a Titan by birth, had chosen before the war began to fight on the side of Zeus and the young gods. He had seen, with the particular foresight that was his divine gift, that the old order was ending and the new order was inevitable, and he had aligned himself with inevitability. His reward for this was a place among the victors rather than the vanquished. For now, his story and what it eventually cost him belongs to another time and another telling. The war was over. the cosmos was remade. But remaking the cosmos does not mean the hard work is finished. It means, in many ways, that the hard work is just beginning. Because overthrowing an order is straightforward compared to creating a new one. Destruction has a natural momentum, a logic that carries you forward from one step to the next. Construction requires something harder, the constant making of decisions about what should exist and how it should be arranged and who should be responsible for what and what the rules should be, and then the willingness to enforce those rules even when enforcing them is difficult and complicated and not the thing that simple power would choose. Zeus stood in the aftermath of the Titanomachy with the entire cosmos effectively his to dispose of. The question of how to dispose of it was not simple. The solution, according to the ancient tradition, was characteristically Greek in its combination of the sacred and the practical. They drew lots. 3 realms needed governance. The sky, the upper world, the domain of weather and light and the movement of heavenly bodies, the place from which divine power was most directly exercised over everything below. The sea, the vast middle realm, the connector and the separator, the thing that made the world an island and that held within its depths mysteries and powers that even the gods did not fully understand. And the underworld, the realm of the dead, the place beneath all places, the permanent destination of every mortal life, the deepest and most final of the 3 great divisions of existence. Zeus drew the sky. This, the ancient commentators suggest, was not merely luck, but a kind of cosmic confirmation. The sky going to the sky god, the thunderbolt finding its natural home in the highest domain. But the mechanism of the lot meant that it could have been otherwise, that Zeus was not simply asserting his dominance over his brothers by claiming the best portion, but accepting what chance, or fate, or the fates, those 3 inexorable weavers whose authority exceeded even that of the gods, had allocated to him. Poseidon drew the sea, and the sea, which had always had the quality of barely contained kinetic wildness that Poseidon had carried even as a swallowed infant, received in its new ruler a being whose temperament matched it perfectly. Turbulent, vast, capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary beauty in rapid succession, not quite predictable even to those who knew it best. Hades drew the underworld. And here we must be careful, because the ancient Greeks were careful about this, about the difference between Hades as a punishment and Hades as a responsibility. The underworld, in the Greek conception, was not a place of torment for its ruler. It was a place of governance, the largest governance of all, because it received every mortal who had ever lived and would receive every mortal who would ever live. Hades ruled a kingdom whose population only ever grew, never shrank. He ruled with the gravity and the certainty of one who had spent his earliest existence in darkness and had therefore lost his fear of it, who understood the dark not as an absence, but as a domain with its own requirements and its own particular form of order. Whether Hades was content with his portion is a question the ancient sources leave productively ambiguous. He never expressed dissatisfaction in the way that Poseidon occasionally did, chafing against the limits of his domain and sometimes testing them. But he also rarely left the underworld, rarely participated in the gatherings of the gods on Olympus, rarely involved himself in the affairs of the upper world, except when those affairs directly impinged on his own realm. He was, in the truest sense, the ruler of his domain, present in it, defined by it, in some ways inseparable from it. The god of the dead and the place of the dead merged, over the centuries of Greek religious thought, into something that was not quite one and not quite the other, but was both simultaneously. The three sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, took their places in the new order in different ways and with different degrees of formal governance. Hestia, who had been the first swallowed and the last released, who had spent more time in darkness than any of her siblings, became in the new order the goddess of the hearth and the sacred fire, the still center around which all community life turned. She was, paradoxically, the most universally present of all the Olympian gods, not because she wandered, but because every hearth was her altar, every domestic fire her presence, every home a small temple to the principle she embodied. The god who had been most thoroughly hidden was now the most continuously present. Demeter took the earth, not the whole of it, that was Gaia's eternal domain, but the living surface of it, the growing things, the grain and the vine, and the fruit trees, and the turning of the seasons that made agriculture possible, and therefore made civilization possible. She was the goddess of what the earth produces when it is cared for and attended to, and worked with the patient intelligence of farmers who understand the relationship between effort and abundance. She was also, though this part of her story would not become fully apparent until later, a goddess who knew in her divine body what it meant to lose a child, whose loss of Persephone, whose grief at that loss would one day darken the world into its first winter and reveal that even the abundance she governed was not unconditional, was tied to emotional truths that no amount of divine authority could override. Hera took the sky alongside Zeus, not as his subordinate, but as his equal in the most formal sense, as his wife, his queen, the other half of the divine sovereignty. Their marriage is one of the most complicated relationships in all of Greek mythology, full of conflict and betrayal and pride, and a love that never quite managed to be simple, that always seemed to be happening simultaneously with its own undoing. But in this moment, in the first moment of the new order, before the complications accumulated, there was something genuine between them. Two beings who had survived the same darkness and emerged into the same light and chosen, looking at each other across the new world to share the highest ground. And Zeus sat on his throne on Olympus, and the cosmos was arranged, and the Titans were bound in Tartarus, and the world below was inhabited by mortals who did not yet fully understand what had changed or what it meant for them. Those Golden Age humans, children of the Golden Age that Cronus had governed, who were being gradually succeeded by new generations of humanity, who would inhabit the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the ages of diminishing ease and increasing effort that followed the fall of the old order. He sat on his throne, and Hesiod tells us that the first thing he did, the very first act of governance in the new divine order, was to invite the other gods to tell him if he had missed anything. If there was anything that still needed ordering, any part of the cosmos that lacked a governing principle, any need that had not been addressed. He asked. This detail is small and easy to overlook, and it is one of the most important things in the entire mythology. Cronus had never asked. Uranus had never asked. The previous divine order had operated on the principle that power knows what it needs to do and does it, that asking is a sign of weakness, that the questions flow in one direction, downward from the powerful to the less powerful, never upward in acknowledgement of the possibility that wisdom might exist in unexpected places. Zeus asked. He asked because his cave childhood had taught him that the person in the hidden place sometimes sees more clearly than the person on the throne. He asked because Metis, who was the embodiment of practical wisdom, had shown him that intelligence is not the exclusive property of the most powerful. He asked because Gaia, the oldest being in the universe, had taught him through her counsel that even absolute power has edges and gaps and oversights, and that the willingness to acknowledge this is not weakness, but the precondition of genuine governance. He asked, and the gods answered, and the world was ordered. Not perfectly, never perfectly. The history of Olympian governance, as anyone familiar with Greek mythology knows, would be rich with conflict and jealousy, and overreach and injustice, and the complicated collateral damage of divine beings working out their natures in a world that also happened to contain millions of mortals whose lives were affected by every divine decision. Zeus himself would not always live up to the standard his first question implied. He would be autocratic, unfaithful, sometimes frightening in his exercise of power, sometimes blind in the very ways his father had been blind. But he would also, again and again, come back to that first question. Come back to the essential posture of inquiry that the cave and his mother and Metis and Gaia had taught him. Come back to the recognition that the world is larger than any single perspective, however divine, and that governance worthy of its name is always, in some fundamental sense, a form of listening. Now let us step back, as the scholar steps back from the primary source to see the larger pattern, and ask what the Titanomachy actually means. What is this war about when we look at it not as divine history, but as human meaning? The ancient Greeks were not naive. They did not believe that the myths were literally true in the way that a newspaper report is literally true. They believed that the myths were true in a different, and in many ways more important sense, that they captured real structures of experience, real patterns of how things happen and why, real maps of the territory of human and cosmic life. The Titanomachy is, on one level, a story about generational change, about the way that each generation must eventually contend with the order that preceded it, must find a way to inhabit a world that was built before it arrived, and that does not automatically accommodate what it is and what it needs. Every generation, in some sense, fights a Titanomachy, a conflict with the previous order that is not simply a matter of the new being right and the old being wrong, but of two different ways of organizing life meeting in an irresolvable tension that can only be settled by one of them prevailing. It is also a story about the relationship between fear and governance. Cronus governed from fear, and his fear swallowed 5 gods and created the conditions of his own eventual defeat. Zeus governed, at least at first, at least in his best moments, from something other than fear, and that something other, whatever it was, created the possibility of a world that Cronus's governance could not have produced. The lesson is not that power corrupts exactly, though it does. The lesson is more specific, that fear, in a being with power, is the most dangerous force in the universe, that the governor who is afraid produces a world that reflects that fear, that shapes itself around the contours of that fear, that eventually becomes a place where the fear is the most real thing. And it is, finally, a story about what liberation actually looks like, not the clean, triumphant liberation of simple narrative, but the complicated, costly, 10-year-long liberation of actual historical change. The Titans were not freed from Cronus's rule in a day. The new gods did not simply claim their birthright and find it waiting for them. They fought for 10 years, learning as they fought, making alliances with beings who had been forgotten in the deepest darkness, accepting help from every direction available, and even then they needed something extraordinary. 3 beings with 100 hands each, the released energy of creatures who had been imprisoned for an age, to tip the balance. Liberation is hard. It is slow. It requires patience of the kind that Zeus's cave childhood had given him, and that his 5 siblings, in their own darkness, had also been compelled to develop. It requires allies that conventional wisdom would not have thought to seek. It requires the willingness to descend to the deepest places and free what has been imprisoned there. And even when it succeeds, the work is not over. The work of building something new from the wreckage of what was overcome is longer and harder and less dramatic than the fighting itself, and it is the work that actually determines whether the liberation meant anything. The cosmos settled into its new arrangement. Olympus rose. The 3 realms were governed. The Hecatoncheires kept their watch over Tartarus, those ancient beings who had been imprisoned and freed, and who now stood guard over others' imprisonment with a particular awareness of what they were guarding, a particular care that came from knowing on both sides what the binding means. And somewhere below all of it, in the darkness of Tartarus, the Titans waited. Not in despair, the ancient sources suggest. Divine beings do not despair in the way that mortals do, because time works differently for them, and what feels to a mortal like an eternity of suffering is to a divine being simply a very long wait. They waited with the patience of those who understand that the wheel turns, that orders change, that what is bound is not necessarily bound forever. Some ancient traditions suggest that eventually, in the fullness of time, in the age that follows even the age we are telling of, Zeus would relent and free the Titans. That the punishment would be served and the binding would be released, and the Titans would be allowed a kind of afterlife, a peaceful existence in the islands of the blessed at the western edge of the world, where Atlas stood with the sky on his shoulders and the last light fell into the sea. Whether this is true, whether the story truly ends in that kind of reconciliation rather than in permanent imprisonment, is a question the different strands of Greek tradition answer differently. It is perhaps a question that each age must answer for itself. Whether the previous order, defeated and bound, eventually deserves its freedom. Whether justice is a permanent state or a process that tends, over long enough time, toward mercy. But that question lies far beyond the horizon of tonight's story. Tonight the war is over. Tonight the cosmos is arranged. Tonight Zeus sits on his throne on the highest mountain in the world, and the thunderbolt rests in his hand, and the world below is full of mortals going about their brief and extraordinary lives, unaware of how close the universe came to being arranged very differently, unaware of the cave and the stone, and the 10 years of shaking ground that produce the world they inhabit. Let the thunder settle into silence. Let the last reverberations of the Titanomachy fade into the deep geological patience of the earth. Let the war's noise dissolve into the quiet of the night around you, the real night, the one you are lying in, with its particular sounds and its particular quality of darkness and its particular smallness after the vast cosmological drama we have been moving through together. You are very still now. Your breathing has found its own deep rhythm, unhurried, moving through you like the tide moves through a harbor, regular, patient, beyond the need for effort or attention. The story has brought you a long way from where it started. You know this story now in a way that goes beyond the knowing of facts. You know it in the way that the body knows a landscape it has moved through slowly, on foot, in changing weather. The way the muscles remember the grade of a hill long after the mind has stopped thinking about it. The story is in you now, the way all good stories eventually find their way into the tissue of the person who has carried them. And so this last chapter asks something different of you than the previous 4. It asks you not to travel further outward into myth, but to turn gently, without urgency, inward, to ask what the story means. Not in the abstract, not as an academic exercise, but in the personal and immediate sense. What does this story mean to you, lying here in the dark, breathing slowly at the particular point in your particular life where this particular night finds you? Because that is what the ancient Greeks ultimately believed myths were for. Not for the cataloging of divine genealogy, not for the entertainment of idle hours, though they provided that too, but for the illumination of life as it is actually lived, the recognition of patterns that recur across the vast distance between divine drama and ordinary human experience, the discovery of yourself in the story and the story in yourself. So let us go slowly through this last chapter. Let us be thorough and gentle and unhurried as the night deserves. There is a question that the story of Cronus and his swallowed children asks more persistently than any other. A question that circles back on itself throughout all 5 chapters, the way a river circles back in an eddy, always moving, always the same motion, always deepening the channel it moves through. The question is this: what do we swallow, and why? Cronus swallowed his children because he was afraid. This is the engine of the entire story, the single act that everything else follows from. The fear, and then the act that fear demanded, and then the consequences of that act, and then the consequences of those consequences, rippling outward through divine generations in the way that a stone dropped into still water sends rings to the furthest shore. He swallowed what he loved most because he could not tolerate the uncertainty of letting it live freely in the world. Because the prophecy had told him that one of his children would overthrow him, and he could not sit with that knowledge and simply allow life to continue, could not find a way to hold the terror of potential loss without acting on it. He reached for the one control available to him, not the control of outcomes, which no one has, but the control of proximity. If his children were inside him, they were safe. If they were inside him, they could not grow into the thing he feared. If they were inside him, the future he dreaded could not arrive. And in doing this, in reaching for that terrible specific control, he created precisely the conditions that guaranteed the future he feared. He gave Zeus his cave. He gave his swallowed children their darkness and their patient forming. He gave Rhea her grief and her ingenuity, and her alliance with the deepest wisdom of the earth. He created the coalition that would defeat him out of his own fear of being defeated. The ancient Greeks were not the first to notice this pattern, and they have not been the last. Every wisdom tradition that has thought carefully about the relationship between fear and control has arrived at the same observation: that the attempt to prevent a feared outcome by the exercise of control tends, with uncanny regularity, to produce that outcome by other means. That the thing we grip too tightly breaks in our hands. That the future we attempt to swallow comes back, always, in ways we did not predict and cannot contain. This is not fate in the simple sense, not the operation of a divine mechanism designed to punish hubris. Though the Greeks used that language because it was available to them, it is something more fundamental and less moralistic than punishment. It is the simple structural reality that control is not the same as safety, that proximity is not the same as connection, that swallowing something is not the same as keeping it. Cronus swallowed his children and lost them anyway. He swallowed them, and they grew, in the dark of him, into something his fear had made inevitable. He swallowed them, and the act of swallowing them made the war that freed them necessary, and the war that freed them ended everything he had been trying to preserve. What do we swallow and why, and what grows in the dark of us that we do not know about? I want to stay with Rhea for a while, here at the end, because I think she has been somewhat overlooked in the dramatic arc of the story, and she deserves more than that. She deserves the careful attention that her choices merit. Rhea did not swallow anything. This seems like an obvious observation, almost too simple to make. But think about what it actually means given the circumstances. Rhea knew what was happening. She had watched Hestia swallowed, and then Demeter, and then Hera, and then Hades, and then Poseidon. 5 times she had placed a child in her husband's hands and watched it disappear. 5 times she had experienced the particular devastation of a loss that was not a death. Because her children were not dead, they were in there, somewhere, alive, in the dark of their father's body, but as inaccessible to her as if they had never existed. 5 times, and each time, the practical logic of compliance was the same. There was nothing she could do. Cronus was stronger. Cronus was the ruler of the cosmos. To resist openly would be to lose everything, to be destroyed or imprisoned, to lose even the possibility of doing something eventually. The rational calculation of the powerless in almost every situation counsels accommodation and patience and the long game. Swallow your grief, swallow your rage, swallow your knowledge of the wrong being done. Wait for a better moment. Rhea did not do this. She waited. Yes, she had no choice about waiting. But she did not swallow what she knew. She did not swallow what she felt. She kept it alive in her, kept it sharp and present and real. And when the moment came, she acted from the full force of it. From 5 pregnancies worth of love and 5 deliveries worth of loss. From the accumulated knowledge of what Cronus was doing and what it would eventually cost him. From the clear-eyed alliance with her mother-in-law and with the earth itself that her refusal to forget had made possible. She did not swallow the stone by accident. She made a choice, a precise, intelligent, deliberate choice that required her to have been paying attention through all those years of apparent compliance, to know what Cronus would and would not look at carefully, to know the precise texture of his certainty, which was also his blindness, to know that a man who swallows his children without looking will accept a stone wrapped in cloth without looking, because the looking is not the point, the swallowing is the point. The act of control is the point, rather than any genuine engagement with what is actually there. She used his blindness against him. She used his certainty against him. She used the very quality of his fear, its insistence on the gesture of control rather than the substance of attention, as the instrument of his eventual undoing. And then she went to Crete, and she sat in the cave with her son, and she told him the truth. This is Rhea's great gift to the story and to us. She told the truth. She did not tell Zeus a story designed to make him feel simple, righteous anger at a simple villain. She told him the complicated truth that his father had been shaped by fear, that the fear had been shaped by a curse, that the curse had grown out of an original act of liberation that had been real and courageous, that the person he would have to oppose was not a monster, but a being whose worst qualities had grown from the same root as his best. She gave Zeus the full picture, the complete and uncomfortable and necessary truth, because she understood that he would need it, that defeating a thing you do not understand is possible, but that governing what comes after requires understanding, requires the full picture, the unswallowed truth. She gave him that. She kept it alive in herself through years of grief and accommodation and careful patience, and then she gave it to her son, and the world was different for it. Let us speak about the swallowed ones: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. 5 divine beings who spent their earliest existence, that period in which for mortals the fundamental shape of a personality is laid down, in which the basic orientation toward the world is established, in which the first and most lasting lessons are absorbed, in the dark, in the interior darkness of their father's body, cut off from light, from the world, from each other, from their mother, from the vast and complex and beautiful and difficult experience of being in the world that every living thing needs in order to become fully itself. What did that do to them? The myth answers this question indirectly through the shape of what they became. Each of them, in their divine adulthood, in the domains they governed, and the qualities they embodied, bears the mark of their particular darkness in ways that are visible once you know to look for them. Hestia, who was swallowed first and held longest, became the goddess of the hearth, of home, of the sacred domestic center, of fire contained and tended rather than fire that runs free. This is not coincidental. Hestia, who had been more thoroughly enclosed than any of the others, became the divine principle of enclosure made sacred, of the difference between the outside and the inside, between the exposed and the protected, between the cold world beyond the threshold and the warm world within it. She had been inside, unable to get out, for longer than any of her siblings, and what she made of that, what she transformed it into, was an understanding of interiority so deep and so complete that she became the goddess of home itself. Not the building, but the quality, the feeling, the orientation toward warmth and center, and the sacred importance of the protected space. She never married. She never wandered. She stayed always at the center of things, at the hearth that was both her domain and herself. Many scholars of Greek religion have read this as a kind of damage, a withdrawal from the world by a being who had been too long enclosed to feel safe in the open. But I think that reading is too simple and too quick to pathologize what it does not fully understand. Hestia's stillness was not the stillness of damage. It was the stillness of a being who had discovered, in the longest darkness, something essential about the nature of center, about why centers matter, about how everything that moves needs something that stays still, about the way that the hearth is the point around which the home organizes itself. She had been that center from the beginning, the first child, the first enclosed, the first to find in the dark a quality of stillness that the world outside would need. Demeter grew plants in the darkness. This is not literally stated in the ancient sources, but it is implied by who she became, the goddess of agriculture, of the turning seasons, of the relationship between the buried seed and the growing shoot, of the deep winter earth and the spring that breaks from it. She had been buried in her father's body, and something in that burial had given her an intimacy with the buried that no other god possessed. She understood from the inside what it means for a living thing to be in the dark and enclosed and waiting. And she understood, therefore, what it means for it to break into the light. The planting and the growing were not metaphors for Demeter. They were the literal shape of her own first experience, translated into a governing principle for the living world. And when she lost Persephone, when her own daughter was taken into the darkness of the underworld, swallowed by the earth rather than by a father, her grief darkened the world into winter, because she knew, with her entire divine being, what it meant to be in the dark. She knew it was survivable. She knew that the spring would come. But she also knew, and this is what her grief truly was about, that survival is not the same as safety, and that the fact of emergence does not undo the fact of the darkness, and that a mother who has been swallowed herself and has watched her children swallowed and has spent her divine life in intimate understanding of the buried and the enclosed has every reason in the world to grieve when her daughter disappears into the ground. Hera came out of the darkness with a quality of wounded pride that never entirely healed. This is the reading that the ancient Greek sources most consistently support. Hera as the queen whose queenliness was never quite sufficient, whose marriage to the most powerful god in the cosmos never quite compensated for the years in the dark, whose jealousy and her fierce insistence on being seen and acknowledged and respected were the direct and logical consequences of having been swallowed. She had been royal from the moment of her birth. She had gone into the dark as royalty. She had survived the dark as royalty. And she had emerged into a world that required her to prove her royalty all over again, constantly, against a husband whose power exceeded hers, and whose faithfulness was not reliable, and whose children by other mothers were everywhere. Constant reminders that her position was never as secure as her dignity required it to be. The ancient Greeks were sometimes unkind to Hera, presenting her jealousy as a character flaw rather than a wound. But the myth, read carefully, is kinder than the tradition has been. Hera's anger was legitimate. Her insistence on being seen was legitimate. She had been swallowed, and she had been forgotten while she was swallowed, and she would not allow herself to be forgotten again. And if that insistence made her difficult and sometimes dangerous, it also made her real and fully herself, and alive in the way that only beings who have genuinely survived something difficult can be alive. Hades descended to the underworld and stayed there. He became, of all the divine children, the one most completely identified with his domain, to the point where the Greeks used his name interchangeably for the god and for the place. The ruler and the realm were inseparable. This too bears the mark of the darkness. Hades had been enclosed in his father's body and had found in that enclosure a quality of depth that he never lost and never particularly wanted to lose. He ruled the deepest realm. He governed the most permanent aspect of existence, the fact of death, the necessity of the ending of every mortal life. He did it with a gravity and a fairness that the ancient Greeks, who feared death as much as any people have ever feared it, found paradoxically reassuring. He was not cruel. He did not revel in his domain. He simply maintained it, kept its order, ensured that what descended into his realm was received and held and dealt with justly. The darkness had given him that. The capacity to be present in the deepest place without being destroyed by it, to govern the ending of things without yourself ending, to hold the final darkness steady so that the world above could go on with its life, in the confidence that the endings were being handled with appropriate seriousness. Poseidon was restless in a way that never entirely resolved. He shook the earth. He stirred up storms at sea. He challenged Zeus's authority with a regularity that made him the most contentious of the divine siblings, the one most likely to push against the boundaries of his domain, to argue that the lot had been unfair, to resist the order his brother had established even when he ultimately complied with it. The kinetic wildness that had been visible in him even as a swallowed infant, the quality that Rhea had noticed and named, had survived the darkness intact, and had emerged into the world looking for the space that would be large enough to contain it. The sea was large enough, barely, and even the sea was sometimes not enough. Hence the earthquakes, the storms that went beyond the sea's normal business, the occasional catastrophic acts of a god who needed more room than he had and took it from the nearest available landscape. Poseidon loved his domain and strained against it simultaneously, which is perhaps the most honest description of any being who has been enclosed against their nature and then released. They love the openness, and they cannot quite trust it, and sometimes they take more of it than they strictly need, just to make sure it is still there. And Zeus, the one who was not swallowed, the one who grew up in the light, hidden light, cave light, the careful and limited light of a secret existence on a Cretan mountain, but light nonetheless. The one whose first experience of the world was not enclosure, but hiding, not imprisonment, but concealment, not darkness, but the constant pressure of maintaining an existence in the face of a threat that was real, but not immediate. What mark did that leave on him? A complicated one. More complicated, perhaps, than the marks left on his siblings, because his was the only childhood in the family that had the quality of an actual childhood, of growth, of learning, of the gradual accumulation of knowledge and capacity through experience rather than through the simple endurance of a static darkness. He learned to be strategic because he had to be strategic from the first moment of his existence. He learned to assess situations carefully, to find allies in unexpected places, to ask for help without pride preventing him from asking, to see the full picture before acting, because the stakes of getting any of it wrong had always been total and immediate. These are qualities that served him well in the Titanomachy and in the governance of the cosmos that followed. But they also, and this is the thing the myth whispers rather than says directly, carried their own shadow. The child who grows up in hiding learns to perform safety while never quite achieving it. The child who has always known that a vast threatening power is looking for them learns a relationship with authority that is never entirely free of the awareness of that threat. Zeus became the most powerful being in the cosmos, and he retained, throughout his divine life, the habits of the hidden child, the need for control that comes from having had none, the difficulty with allowing others the freedom he himself had been denied, the occasional sudden violence of a being who learned very early that surprise is the only reliable weapon against overwhelming force. The Thunderbolt is the symbol of Zeus's power. It is also, if we look at it clearly, the symbol of that learned, sudden violence. It comes without warning. It comes from the sky, from the domain that Zeus governs, that is most his. And it falls on what displeases him with a certainty and a finality that does not always leave room for the careful strategic intelligence that the cave also gave him. The Thunderbolt is Brontes and Steropes and Arges, yes, is the gift of the Cyclopes, the crafted instrument of divine power. But it is also the hidden child striking first, striking fast, striking before the threat can develop, the reflex of the perpetually hunted given divine form and divine force. Zeus at his best was the god who asked, who listened, who governed with something approaching justice, who remembered the counsel of Rhea and Metis and Gaia, and acted from it. Zeus at his worst was a being who had never fully resolved the terror of his first years, who reached for the thunderbolt when the cave child in him remembered, suddenly and viscerally, what it felt like to know that a god with the power of the cosmos was looking for him, and to have no defense except his own intelligence and the small advantages of the hidden and the patient. He was both of these things simultaneously, always. The story does not let us separate them. The strategic patience and the sudden violence are not two different Zeuses, but one. one being whose greatness and whose damage grew from the same root, watered by the same years of the same cave, shaped by the same fear that had shaped his father, and that he spent his entire divine career trying, with mixed success, to be different from. Which brings us to the question that the story has been building toward from the very beginning, from the void and the first act of creation all the way through the Golden Age and the swallowing and the cave and the Titanomachy and the new order on Olympus. The question that Hesiod asks and does not fully answer, that the ancient commentators circled around without resolving, that the myth holds open like a wound that has not quite closed. Did Zeus become his father? The ancient sources are merciless in their honesty about this. They do not let Zeus off the hook. Because Zeus, who had been born to replace a tyrant, who had grown up knowing the harm that a god's fear could do, who had freed his siblings from the darkness his father had put them in, and then freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires from the darkness his grandfather had put them in. Zeus eventually swallowed Metis. Metis, who had helped him free his siblings. Metis, who had administered the draft that undid Cronus's swallowing. Metis, whose name meant wisdom, whose entire nature was the cunning intelligence that finds the solution no one else has seen. Metis, who was pregnant with a child who, a prophecy said, an oracle declared, Gaia herself warned, would be born more powerful than their father. And Zeus, hearing this prophecy, felt something that Cronus would have recognized immediately. Felt the particular cold certainty of a being who has been told that the future holds their undoing, who reaches for the nearest available form of control, who cannot find a way to sit with the uncertainty and let life continue. He swallowed Metis. He swallowed the goddess of wisdom. He swallowed the mother of his child. He swallowed the being who, more than any other, had made it possible for him to be what he was. And he swallowed her for the same reason his father had swallowed his siblings, with the same logic, toward the same end. The myth does not attempt to mitigate this. It does not offer an excuse or a justification that transforms the act into something other than what it is. It presents it plainly as one of the things that Zeus did, as part of the record of his divine life, alongside the Thunderbolt and the asking and the strategic patience and the governance of the cosmos. He swallowed Metis, and the wisdom he had swallowed became a permanent part of him. The ancient tradition says that Athena, the daughter who had been in Metis's womb at the time of the swallowing, was eventually born directly from Zeus's head, bursting out fully formed and fully armored, the goddess of wisdom entering the world through the skull of the god who had swallowed her mother. But Metis herself was never released, was never unswallowed in the way that Rhea had managed to ensure Zeus's siblings were unswallowed. Metis remained inside Zeus as his own siblings had remained inside Cronus, and the great irony, the irony that the myth places before us without comment, trusting us to see it, is that Zeus's governance was thereafter improved by the swallowed wisdom within him, that the divine quality of Metis was not extinguished by the swallowing, but was incorporated, transformed from an autonomous being with her own perspective and her own freedom into something that served the agenda of the one who had swallowed her. This is what the cycle looks like when it does not fully break. Not a repetition of the exact form. Zeus does not swallow all of his children as Cronus had, does not create the identical catastrophe, but a repetition of the essential structure. Fear of displacement, reach for control, the swallowing of something that should have been allowed its freedom. The pattern finds a new expression in a new being, and the new expression is different enough from the original that it is possible not to recognize it as the same pattern. But it is. The myth knows this, and the myth also knows that this is not cause for despair. Because here is what else is true. Athena was born. Wisdom entered the world, even through the fractured and difficult medium of a god who had swallowed her mother. The wisdom did not stay swallowed forever. It found its way out, through the skull, through the hardest part of the body, born already armed and already knowing what it knew, already in full possession of the qualities that had been her mother's. Metis's wisdom was not lost. It was transformed and delayed and born under difficult circumstances, but it was not lost. And Hestia's fire was not lost, and Demeter's abundance was not lost. And the 5 swallowed gods had become, each of them, themselves, fully and completely themselves, carrying the mark of their darkness as something that was not only wound, but also wisdom, not only damage, but also depth. And Zeus's question, his first act as ruler, the asking, the leaning forward with an open hand, that was not lost either. It was real. It happened. Whatever came after, whatever failures and repetitions and thunderbolts fell on people who deserved better, the asking was real and it mattered, and it was the thing that distinguished the new order from the old, the thing that made the cosmos, under Olympian governance, genuinely different from what it had been under Titan governance. Even if not perfectly different, even if not free of the old patterns. The ancient Greeks were not utopians. They did not believe in the perfectibility of the divine any more than they believed in the perfectibility of the human. What they believed in, what the whole long, complicated, beautiful, terrible mythology of the Olympians argues, from the Titanomachy to the smallest domestic story of a household god, is the reality of change. Incremental, costly, incomplete, frequently compromised, never arriving at a final destination, but real. The movement from Uranus to Cronus to Zeus is a movement towards something, even if that something is not perfection. It is a movement toward more justice, more inquiry, more willingness to ask rather than simply command, even if the God who asks also sometimes swallows, even if the new order contains the seeds of the next conflict, even if every liberation eventually produces new imprisonments that will require their own liberation. The wheel turns, but it does not only turn in circles, it moves forward too, with each revolution, along a road that is very long and that none of us can see the end of. There is one final thing I want to tell you, here at the very end, something that the ancient Greeks built into the structure of this myth, with a subtlety that is easy to miss on a first or even a second reading. The stone. The stone that Rhea wrapped in swaddling cloth and gave to Cronus. The stone he swallowed believing it was his 6th child. The stone that came out first when the divine draft reversed the swallowing, before any of the actual children. That stone was placed at Delphi, at the navel of the world, and kept there. Pilgrims traveled from across the Greek world to see it. It was anointed with oil. It was wrapped in wool. It was given the careful attention and reverence that Cronus should have given his children. The physical, material, ongoing attention of human hands performing an act of care for something that mattered. What was that stone? On one level, it was evidence, the physical proof of Rhea's ingenuity and Cronus's blindness, a monument to the moment when a mother's love was cleverer than a tyrant's fear. On another level, it was a relic, the sacred object that marks a site of significance, that holds in its material substance the memory of what happened there. But on a third level, the level at which myth does its deepest work, the stone was something else entirely. The stone was the thing that Cronus had swallowed instead of dealing with what he actually feared. It was the substitute, the displacement, the object he had used to manage his anxiety without actually confronting it. He had swallowed a stone and felt safe, and the safety was entirely false, and the stone at Delphi was the permanent record of that false safety, the thing that could not be digested, that came out unchanged, that was neither harmed by being swallowed nor transformed by it, that simply waited in the dark and emerged when the time came, exactly as it had gone in. The Greeks kept that stone and honored it because they understood, with the profound collective intelligence of a people who had spent centuries in intimate relationship with these stories, that the recognition of our false safeties is one of the most important recognitions available to us. That the things we swallow to make ourselves feel in control are not transformed by the swallowing. They emerge unchanged, and they emerge at the worst possible moment, and they are waiting for us at Delphi, anointed and wrapped and completely themselves, regardless of how long we kept them inside us. The oracle at Delphi, that most significant of all ancient Greek religious institutions, the place people came from the furthest reaches of the known world to ask their most important questions, was established at the site where the stone fell. At the place where Cronus's false safety landed when the truth arrived. Know yourself. Gnoti Seauton. The most famous words ever inscribed at Delphi, carved above the entrance to the temple of Apollo, where the oracle sat. Know yourself. And perhaps implicit in that injunction, perhaps audible to anyone who stood before those words, knowing the story of the stone that fell at that very spot. Know what you have swallowed. Know what you are carrying inside you, that was never meant to be swallowed at all. Know the fear that made you reach for control instead of connection, for the gesture of safety instead of the difficult reality of trust. Know yourself, and maybe, knowing yourself, begin the work of letting what you have swallowed come back into the light. The story of Cronus and his swallowed children does not end with the Titanomachy, does not end with Zeus on his throne, or the cosmos divided, or the Titans bound in Tartarus. It ends here, in this observation, in this question turned inward, in the recognition that the distance between Cronus and any of us is not as vast as we might prefer to believe, because we all swallow things. We all reach in moments of fear for the control that feels like safety and is not. We all have our stones wrapped in cloth, the substitutes we offer ourselves when the real thing feels too dangerous to hold. We all have our caves on Crete where we hide the parts of ourselves that we fear will be taken from us. We all have our Rheas, the wise and loving presences who tell us the uncomfortable truth when we are ready to hear it. We all have our Metisses, the quick intelligence that we sometimes absorb without acknowledging, that we carry inside us without fully liberating. The myth does not tell us we can solve this. It does not offer a final liberation, a definitive moment after which the swallowing stops and the fear is overcome and the cycle breaks for good. It is not that kind of story because human experience is not that kind of experience. The cycle does not break. It modifies. It changes shape. It finds new expressions that are different enough from the old ones to represent genuine progress and similar enough to remind us that we are still, always, working on the same essential problem. What the myth tells us, what all 5 chapters of this long night story have been building toward, is that the work is worth doing, that the asking is better than the not asking, that the cave, however cramped and limiting, is better than the swallowing, that the 10 years of war are better than the permanent golden age built on the foundation of 5 gods' imprisonment, that the imperfect new order, with all its Olympian complications and divine jealousies and thunderbolts falling on people who deserved better, that imperfect new order is genuinely better than the perfect golden age that rested on a lie. Progress is real, even when it is incomplete. Change is possible, even when the patterns reassert themselves. The wheel moves forward, even as it turns. You are very still now. The story has brought you to the quietest place it knows. This place, the one you are in right now, lying in the dark with your breathing slow and your body heavy, and your mind beginning to release its grip on the day that was and the day that will be, releasing even its grip on this story, letting it go the way you let go of a held breath, slowly and completely. Somewhere in you, the story is settling, finding the places where it fits, the shapes in you that were waiting for exactly these words, these images, these patterns. The cave and the stone and the swallowed gods and the 10 years of war and the question asked with an open hand. All of it settling into the deep places where the stories we need find their permanent home. You do not need to think about any of it consciously. The thinking has been done. What happens now is something quieter and slower and more important than thinking. The long, patient underground work of integration, the way the story becomes part of how you see things, the way the pattern becomes visible in your own experience when the time comes that you need to see it. Sleep will come soon, if it has not come already. And when it comes, perhaps somewhere in the slow geography of your dreaming, you will visit the cave on Crete, that small, warm limestone place on the mountain above the Aegean. You will smell the thyme and feel the cool air of the underground spring and hear somewhere at the entrance the rhythmic clash of shields on shields keeping the noise of the world at bay. And perhaps in that dream cave, you will find what Zeus found there. Not certainty, not answers, not the finished form of what you will become, just the time, just the patience, just the understanding that the cave is not the destination, that you are not meant to stay here forever, that emergence is coming, that outside the cave mouth the world is waiting to be engaged and changed and asked about and governed with something approaching wisdom, just the knowledge that you are becoming, that even in the dark, especially in the dark, the becoming continues. That is enough. That has always been enough. The story is complete.